It did not begin with the roar of engines, nor with the crash of surf against steel. It began in silence, a silence so heavy it seemed carved out of the fear that gripped an entire continent. A silence that stretched across occupied Europe, across cities swallowed by darkness, across families waiting for liberation that never came. A silence that only a single decision could break. In back rooms where maps covered entire walls, where generals spoke in low voices, where every word carried the weight of millions, a plan took shape. Not a bold strike, not a heroic charge, but a gamble. The kind of gamble nations choose only when tyranny has taken everything except the will to fight back. They envisioned an armada so large the sea itself would seem too small for it. A crossing so dangerous that even victory promised unbearable loss. A moment when the free world would place its fate not in legends, not in myths, but in the hands of ordinary men prepared to do something extraordinary. And those men came. They came from quiet towns where war felt like a distant rumor, from cities where mothers waited by radios through the night, from farms, factories, schoolyards, and steel mills. They gathered under bleak English skies, training for a mission they did not fully understand, carrying fears they rarely admitted, preparing to step into a storm they could not truly imagine. Because what waited across the channel was not merely a battlefield. It was a fortress. Concrete, steel, mines, wire. A wall of fire stretching across an entire coastline, built by an enemy, convinced it could shape the future with iron and fear. But walls cannot stop the weight of destiny. And destiny, on that day, would belong to them. When the order came, it came quietly. A phrase spoken into radios before disappearing into the cold night air. Engines ignited. The channel trembled beneath thousands of ships. The greatest armada in human history began to move, carving dark paths across a restless sea. Men packed into landing craft felt every wave like a blow. Salt burned their eyes. The wind tasted of diesel and nerves. Some clutched rosaries. Some whispered jokes to mask shaking hands. Some stared ahead, wondering if the first light of morning would be the last they ever saw. No one spoke of glory. No one spoke of heroism. Those were words for newspapers, not for men who knew the price that dawn would demand. The beaches had names now. Simple names. Quiet names that would soon carry the weight of eternity. Utah. Omaha. At Utah, the sea performed a quiet miracle. Currents dragged the landing craft off course, delivering the first waves into a lighter patch of defences. Confusion turned into opportunity. Chance became survival. But Omaha was different. Omaha had been designed to kill. As the first grey light crept across the waves, the coastline exploded. Machine guns tore through the morning. Mortars churned the sea into foam. Mines ripped boats apart like paper. Men stumbled into water colder than fear. Some died before their boots touched sand. Some barely made it out of the surf. Some crawled behind steel obstacles for seconds of borrowed life. Omaha did not welcome them. It punished them. But even in that nightmare, something unbreakable began to rise. Small groups of survivors, scattered, soaked, terrified, bloodied, refused to stop. They crawled forward, inch by inch. They climbed bluffs that were never meant to be taken. They stormed positions built to withstand anything except relentless courage. Slowly, impossibly, the German defences began to crack. By midday, the beaches were unrecognisable. Sand torn apart, water stained red, air thick with smoke and salt. But the line had been breached. Footholds turned into strongholds. The impossible had been done. D-Day was not triumph. It was sacrifice. It was the raw cost of liberation laid bare. Ordinary men carried the weight of the free world onto shores designed to erase them. And by doing so, they opened the door to Europe's salvation. Tonight, we return to those shores, to the surf where fear met courage, to the cliffs where determination climbed into gunfire, to the morning when the future balanced on the edge of a single fragile moment and the world held its breath. Before we begin, tell me, in words, where in the world you are tuning in from tonight and what hour it is for you as we step back into history together. Are you somewhere warm and quiet? Or can you almost feel that cold Normandy wind brushing against your face as the past begins to speak again? And if these long, deep, journeys into the past help you unwind, help you reflect, help you drift, consider subscribing. March 15th, 1944, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel stands on the windswept beach at Vierville-sur-Mer, his boots sinking into the grey Norman sand. Behind him, concrete bunkers rise like tombstones from the bluffs, their gun slits staring blankly toward England. He has been here for 3 months now, racing against time to build what Hitler calls the Atlantic Wall, but what Rommel sees is a half-finished dream. The obstacles in the surf are too few, the mines too sparse, the wire too thin. He turns to his engineers and delivers a verdict that will echo through history. The enemy must be annihilated before he reaches our main battlefield. It is a philosophy that will cost thousands of American lives, and it begins with transforming these beaches into a graveyard waiting for its dead. The Atlantic Wall stretches 2,400 miles from the frozen fjords of Norway to the Spanish border, consuming resources that Germany can no longer afford to spend. Since February, Rommel has overseen the placement of 517,000 beach obstacles along the French coast, a maze of steel and wood designed to rip the bottoms from landing craft. Millions of mines are being buried in the sand, each one a silent promise of destruction. But Rommel knows the truth, that propaganda conceals. This wall is not impregnable. It is a facade, a psychological weapon, as much as a physical one, built to convince both Germans and Allies that invasion here would be suicide. The concrete is real, the guns are real, but the gaps between strong points are measured in miles, not yards. What makes the wall formidable is not its strength, but the belief in its strength. Yet within this incomplete fortress, certain points have become genuinely lethal. Whitestan's Nest 62, a fortified resistance nest overlooking what the Americans will call Omaha Beach, represents Rommel's vision in microcosm. The position bristles with 5 heavy machine guns, 3 anti-tank weapons, and mortars pre-sighted to rain death on every yard of sand below. Corporal Franz Gockel, a 23-year-old gunner from Bavaria, has spent weeks preparing his firing positions, memorizing distances, clearing sight lines. He and his comrades have pored over maps showing the precise spots where landing craft will beach, where infantry will cluster, where vehicles will emerge from the surf. This is not the static defence of the old guard, the concrete and wire mentality that Rommel despises. This is active defence, intelligent defence, defence that adapts and kills with precision. The German force defending Normandy in spring 1944 is a patchwork of contradictions. The 716th Static Infantry Division holds the coastline, composed largely of older men and impressed foreigners, Poles and Russians pressed into German uniforms. They are adequate for manning bunkers, but useless for counterattack. Behind them, supposedly out of range, sits the 352nd Infantry Division, a unit of a different character entirely. These are veterans, survivors of the Eastern Front, men who have learned warfare in the pitiless school of Russia. They arrived in Normandy to rest and refit, but Rommel has kept them close, positioning them within striking distance of the beaches. It is a decision made, quietly, without fanfare, a tactical repositioning that Allied intelligence will fatally underestimate. The 352nd represents the teeth behind the wall's concrete gums. The architecture of the Atlantic Wall reveals Hitler's obsession with grandeur over practicality. Each major fortification consumed 3.7 billion Reichsmarks, money desperately needed for tanks, aircraft, fuel. The bunkers themselves are masterpieces of military engineering. Reinforced concrete, 6 to 10 feet thick, designed to withstand direct hits from naval shells. Inside, German soldiers have electric lights, ventilation systems, protected supply rooms. But the bunkers are isolated, unable to support each other once Allied troops penetrate between them. Rommel sees this flaw clearly. He has argued for mobile reserves, for the ability to rush panzer divisions to the invasion point within hours. But Field Marshal von Rundstedt, overall commander in the West, disagrees. He wants armour held back, husbanded for a massive counterattack after the Allies commit themselves. This fundamental disagreement in German strategy, defence at the waterline versus defence in depth, will never be resolved before June 6th. The compromise leaves Germany with neither approach executed fully. By late April 1944, the pace of construction reaches fever pitch. In a single week, German engineers plant 4 million mines along the Normandy coast. Teenagers from the Reich Labor Service, boys too young for the Wehrmacht, are pressed into service hauling steel beams and concrete. They construct what the soldiers call Czech hedgehogs, angled steel beams welded together to puncture landing craft hulls. They drive wooden stakes into the sand, each topped with a mine, creating forests of explosives that will be covered by high tide. Belgian gates, steel frames 10 feet high, are positioned in the surf. The beach becomes an industrial landscape of death, every element designed to kill a specific type of vessel or vehicle. At low tide, the obstacles are exposed, ugly and obvious. At high tide, they vanish beneath the waves, invisible teeth waiting to bite. A young Wehrmacht soldier named Gustav writes home in May, his letter filled with confidence that borders on arrogance. "The Tommies and Ammies will drown before they touch the sand," he tells his mother. "We have made the coast impossible." He describes the view from his bunker, how he can see for miles along the beach, how every approach is covered by interlocking fields of fire. Gustav is not stupid or deluded. He is looking at the same beaches that will soon be called Omaha and Utah, seeing them as any defender would, as killing grounds perfectly suited to massacre attackers. What Gustav cannot know, what no German soldier can fully grasp, is the scale of what is coming. They have prepared to face divisions. They will face armies. Inside Hitler's command post at Berchtesgaden, the Führer examines architectural models of the Atlantic Wall with childlike fascination. These are not military briefings, but theatrical presentations, miniature fortresses and tiny soldiers arranged like toys. Hitler declares the wall the greatest fortification in history, comparing it to the Maginot Line, but stronger, better, German. His generals know better, but say nothing. The wall is political as much as military, designed to shore up German morale and terrify German enemies. Goebbels' propaganda machine has done its work well. Newsreels show impregnable bunkers, endless obstacles, confident soldiers. The German public believes the coast is secure. More importantly, many Allied planners believe it too. The psychological value of the Atlantic Wall may exceed its military value, creating in enemy minds the image of Fortress Europe that must be overcome, not just tactically but mentally. Yet for all the concrete and steel, for all the mines and machine guns, the Atlantic Wall suffers from a fatal vulnerability. It cannot move. Once the Allies choose their invasion point, German forces must fight where they stand or rush reinforcements from miles away. Rommel understands this with brutal clarity. His entire defensive philosophy stems from the knowledge that Germany lacks the fuel, the vehicles, and the air cover to shift forces rapidly once battle begins. The wall must win in the first hours, or it will not win at all. This is why he drives his men so hard, why he demands more obstacles, more mines, more wire. He is building not a defense for a long campaign, but a trap for a single day. Everything depends on that day. Everything depends on destroying the invasion at the water's edge in the first minutes, before American industrial might can establish itself on European soil. On aerial reconnaissance, photographs taken May 20th, 1944, the beaches of Normandy appear as dense mosaics of obstacles. RAF photo. Interpreters count individual stakes, individual hedgehogs, individual mines. They measure the distances between bunkers, plot the angles of fire, estimate the garrison strengths. What they see confirms their worst fears. The beaches are killing zones, designed with methodical German precision to slaughter anyone who approaches. Allied planners studying these photographs know that men will die by the thousands when the invasion comes. They know that some beaches will run red with blood, that some units will be destroyed, that some landing craft will never reach the shore. But they also know something the Germans do not. The attack is coming not to one beach, but to 5. Not with thousands of men, but with hundreds of thousands. Not with hope, but with certainty. The Atlantic Wall is formidable, but it is a wall designed to stop an army that no longer exists, a wall built for the warfare of 1940, facing the industrial avalanche of 1944. It awaits its test, confident and doomed. January 14th, 1944, RAF Medmenham, England. Flight Officer Constance Babington Smith leans over a stereoscope in a converted country house, 30 miles from London. Before her lie 2 seemingly identical aerial photographs of the French coast, taken seconds apart from a Spitfire flying at 25,000 feet. Through the stereoscope's twin eyepieces, the flat images merge into 3 dimensions, and the beach rises into relief like a terrain model. She is hunting for changes, comparing yesterday's photographs with today's, looking for anything new. Her eyes ache from hours of this work, but she has trained herself to see what others miss. Then, in the bluffs above what intelligence calls beach number 46, she spots it, a fresh concrete shadow that was not there 3 days ago. She marks the photograph with a grease pencil and writes in precise handwriting, "New gun emplacement, estimated 75mm, oriented, northwest." It is one observation among thousands, but it will be added to the massive intelligence mosaic that will save lives in 5 months. The operation to map the Atlantic Wall is unprecedented in the history of warfare. Since late 1943, RAF and American reconnaissance aircraft have flown over 4,000 sorties along the Normandy coast, taking 3.5 million photographs. Every mile of beach has been photographed at multiple altitudes, in different light conditions, at different tides. Photo interpreters work 12-hour shifts, examining every image under magnification, looking for gun positions, troop movements, defensive works. They identify bunkers by their shadows, calculate the thickness of concrete by its resistance to bombing, determine the caliber of artillery by the size of shell casings visible in supply dumps. It is detective work conducted at 20,000 feet, piecing together the enemy's secrets one photograph at a time. By June, they will have created the most detailed intelligence picture of enemy defences ever assembled before an invasion. But aerial photography can only reveal what can be seen from above. For the interior details, the hidden guns, the underground bunkers, the minefields, Allied intelligence depends on the French resistance. Michel Jacques is a 38-year-old fisherman from Vieilleville-sur-Mer who has watched Germans fortify his hometown for 4 years. He knows every bunker, every gun, every patrol route. In March 1944, he is approached by a resistance organiser who asks him to draw what he has seen. Jack spends 3 nights sketching from memory the interior layout of Whitestan's Nest 62, the massive fortified position overlooking Omaha Beach. He notes the placement of machine guns, the thickness of walls, the location of ammunition storage, the routes of communication trenches. His sketch is photographed onto microfilm, sewn into the lining of a jacket and carried by courier to England. It arrives at Allied headquarters along with hundreds of similar reports, fragments of local knowledge that will be assembled into operational intelligence. At Southwick House, near Portsmouth, this avalanche of information is transformed into the Neptune Monograph, a 2,700-page intelligence document that is part encyclopedia, part tactical manual. Every German strongpoint has been given a designation and a detailed description. Whitestan's Nest 62 becomes WN62 in Allied nomenclature, its guns and garrison catalogued with clinical precision. The document includes overlays showing fields of fire, photographs of obstacles at different tide levels, diagrams of bunker construction. Most remarkably, it includes massive sand tables, relief models of the invasion beaches built to precise scale. Officers preparing for D-Day walk around these tables like gods, surveying creation, studying every fold of ground, every draw up the bluffs, every natural choke point. The models are so detailed that soldiers will later report recognising specific features they studied weeks before in England. Yet for all this intelligence magnificence, a shadow lurks in the reports. By late April, aerial reconnaissance and resistance sources begin reporting unusual German troop movements in the Normandy sector. The 716th Static Division, expected to defend the beaches, is being supplemented by additional forces. Analysts note references to the 352nd Infantry Division, a combat-experienced unit that intelligence has tracked to the Street Low area, 20 miles inland. But the reports are contradictory. Some sources place the 352nd at Street Low. Others suggest elements have moved closer to the coast. Photo interpreters cannot definitively locate the division from aerial imagery alone. A debate begins in intelligence circles about whether the 352nd is within range to respond to an invasion. The conclusion, fatally, is ambiguous. Possibly yes. Probably no. Insufficient evidence to confirm. The intelligence apparatus also tracks German doctrine and leadership. Analysis of captured documents reveals Rommel's defensive philosophy: annihilate the enemy at the water's edge. This understanding shapes Allied planning, confirming that the first minutes of the invasion will be catastrophically violent. Intelligence officers warn that German doctrine calls for immediate counterattack, that reserves will rush to the invasion point within hours. What they cannot predict is the chaos that will grip German command when the moment comes, the paralysis caused by Hitler's insistence that only he can authorize the release of panzer reserves. The Allied intelligence picture is remarkably complete about static defences and remarkably incomplete about German command dysfunction. This gap will prove strategically valuable, though the Allies do not yet know it. Colonel Remy, codename for Gilbert Renault, runs one of the most productive intelligence networks in occupied France. His agents are embedded in French labour units working on Atlantic wall construction, in telephone exchanges that carry German military communications, in railroad offices that track German troop trains. In April 1944, his network reports a significant detail. Rommel has ordered a massive increase in beach obstacles, tripling their density in just 3 months. Previous estimates of obstacle counts are outdated within weeks. This intelligence triggers a crisis in Allied planning. The obstacles are specifically designed to destroy landing craft at high tide. If the invasion comes at high tide, casualties among naval crews will be catastrophic. But low tide means infantry must cross 200 yards of exposed beach under fire. The obstacle intelligence forces a brutal calculation: land at low tide when obstacles are visible, accepting that men will die crossing the beach, or land at high tide when obstacles are hidden, accepting that boats will sink before reaching shore. The decision, ultimately, is for low tide with a rising tide, a narrow window that balances both dangers. The intelligence operation is not without failures and blindness. Despite all the photographs, all the agent reports, all the careful analysis, the crucial details are missed or misinterpreted. The exact strength of the 352nd Division remains uncertain. The effectiveness of naval bombardment against reinforced concrete is overestimated. The ability of DD amphibious tanks to reach shore in rough seas is untested. Most critically, intelligence provides an accurate count of German guns and men but cannot predict how they will perform under stress, whether they will fight or flee, whether ammunition will last or run out. War is not conducted on paper, and the map is not the territory. The intelligence officers know they have built an extraordinary picture of the enemy, but they also know it is incomplete, that surprises await, that soldiers will face realities no photograph can capture. By early June, the intelligence has been distilled into briefings for every unit involved in the invasion. Company commanders study detailed maps of their specific landing zones. Infantry sergeants memorize the layout of German strongpoints they will assault. Tank commanders review photographs of the terrain they will cross. The intelligence has become democratized, pushed down to the men who will actually do the fighting. Private soldiers know the designation of the bunker they are supposed to capture, the type of gun it contains, the estimated size of its garrison. This distribution of knowledge is revolutionary. In previous wars, soldiers were kept ignorant, told only to follow orders. Now they are treated as tactical decision-makers, given the information they need to adapt when plans collapse. It is a recognition that battles are won not by generals but by corporals and privates who must think and act when communications break down and officers fall. The intelligence effort culminates in a final update on June 5th, hours before the invasion. Last-minute reconnaissance flights photograph the beaches at sunset, confirming that the obstacles and defences have not changed overnight. Resistance networks report no unusual German activity, no alerts, no massing of reserves. The assessment is as good as it can be. The Germans are not expecting an attack tonight. The Atlantic Wall is as mapped, as understood, as predictable as enemy defences can ever be. What cannot be quantified is what will happen when 200,000 men crash against it, when plans meet reality, when intelligence becomes experience. The map readers have done their work with extraordinary skill. Now the map must be tested against the territory, and the territory will have the final word. The photographs and reports and models will be proven right in most details and catastrophically wrong in others. The intelligence has illuminated the enemy's dispositions. It has not eliminated the fundamental uncertainty of war. May 28th, 1944. A dusty parade ground in Dorchester, England. Sergeant Ray Nance walks down a line of 12 men standing at attention, their equipment laid out for inspection. He is 31 years old, a tobacco farmer from Virginia, and these men are his responsibility, his squad, his family, for the past 18 months of training. Private First Class Harold Baumgarten stands third in line, 19 years old, barely shaving, carrying an Amoni Garand rifle and 68 pounds of additional equipment. Nance stops before him and tugs at his cartridge belt, checking that it is properly fastened. "You'll remember how to swim in that?" Nance asks, not unkindly. Baumgarten grins nervously. "Just point me at the beach, Sergeant." Nance moves on, saying nothing, knowing that in 8 days, Baumgarten will be shot through the face, that his youth and confidence will be tested in ways no training can prepare for. The 116th Infantry Regiment carries history in its lineage. These men are descendants, symbolically, of Stonewall Jackson's brigade, the Stonewall Brigade of the Civil War, fighting now in a different war but carrying the same Virginia regimental traditions. The squad reflects the composition of America itself. Farm boys from Virginia and North Carolina, factory workers from Pennsylvania, a few college students who enlisted after Pearl Harbor. They have trained together for so long that they move as a single organism, each man knowing his role without needing orders. Private Leo Nash is the BAR gunner, carrying the squad's automatic weapon, 20 pounds of Browning automatic rifle plus ammunition. Private First Class Robert Sales is the assistant bar, carrying extra magazines. The rest are riflemen, scouts, grenadiers. They are not elite troops, not rangers or paratroopers. They are ordinary infantry, the men who will do the actual work of conquest, the unglamorous soldiers who will either take the beach or die trying. On June 3rd, the squad attends its final briefing in a converted warehouse. The walls are covered with maps and aerial photographs. For the first time, they learn their objective, a beach in Normandy designated Omaha, specifically a 50-yard wide section called Easy Red. They see photographs of the bluffs they must climb, the bunkers they must assault, the obstacles they must cross. An intelligence officer, a captain who has never heard a shot fired in anger, walks them through the German defences with clinical precision. "This is WN62, he says, pointing to a photograph of a concrete bunker. 5 machine guns, estimated garrison 20 to 30 men. Your objective is to breach this position and secure the draw leading inland." The men stare at the photograph, trying to memorize every detail, trying to imagine what it will be like to attack such a place. Sergeant Nance asks the question everyone is thinking, what's the expected casualty rate? The captain hesitates. Assuming bombardment destroys most defences, 10 to 15% in the first hour. He does not mention that bombardment might fail, that the estimate is optimistic, that some companies will lose 90%. June 5th, 6:30 in the evening. The squad boards, landing craft assault number 9 to 10, a 30-foot steel box with a ramp at the front. They descend into the boat, like men entering a coffin, arranging themselves on the narrow benches that run along each side. 12 men, knee to knee, equipment pressing against them. The boat rocks violently even in the harbour. Private Nash immediately vomits into his helmet. Others follow. Seasickness will prove to be nearly universal, adding misery to fear. They have been issued vomit bags, but the bags are inadequate for 12 hours at sea. The smell becomes unbearable. A mixture of diesel fuel, vomit, and fierce sweat. The ramp is up, sealing them inside. Above them, British sailors operate the craft, but the infantrymen cannot see out, cannot see where they are going, can only feel the motion as the boat moves from harbour to channel. The weight each man carries is staggering. Rifle and ammunition, 10 clips of 8 rounds each. Grenades, 2 fragmentation, 2 smoke, entrenching tool, gas mask, though no one expects gas warfare, rations for 3 days, water canteen, first aid kit, Bangalore torpedo sections for blowing wire obstacles. Some men carry flamethrower fuel, others mortar rounds, others radio batteries. The equipment is necessary, but it transforms each soldier into a pack mule. They have practiced moving with this weight, but practice was on dry land, not in chest-deep water, not under fire. The life belts they wear are kapok-filled tubes around their waists, designed to keep them afloat if they fall into water. But the belts are inadequate for men carrying 70 pounds of gear. If a man goes down in deep water, the weight will drag him under faster than the belt can hold him up. Darkness falls, and the boat continues its journey across the channel. The men try to sleep but cannot. Some pray, lips moving silently. Others write last letters in their heads, messages to mothers and sweethearts they will never deliver. Sergeant Nance moves through the boat despite the pitching, checking each man, tightening straps, offering quiet words. He finds Private Baumgarten shivering, not from cold, but from anticipation. "You scared?" Nance asks. Baumgarten nods. "Me too." Nance admits, "Everybody is. The trick is doing your job anyway." It is the kind of simple wisdom that combat veterans understand and green troops cannot yet grasp. Fear is acceptable, paralysis is not. They will all be terrified. The question is whether they can function through the terror. At 4 a.m. on June 6th, Sergeant Nance conducts a final equipment check. He discovers that 2 men have improperly secured their lifebelts, the straps twisted in ways that will make them useless. He adjusts them by touch in the darkness, his hands working from months of practice. He checks that each man has his weapon clean and loaded, that grenades are secure, that no equipment is loose enough to snag during the exit from the boat. This is the last moment of his authority over them. Once the ramp drops, order will dissolve into chaos. Each man will be alone, responsible for himself, connected to the others only by training and hope. Nance knows this. He has been in combat before, in North Africa. Brief actions that taught him the essential truth. Battles are not won by companies or platoons, but by individuals making split-second decisions to advance or retreat, to fight or surrender. The boat pitches through increasingly heavy seas. Force 5, winds have been blowing all night, creating swells 4 to 6 feet high. Landing craft assault 9 to 10 is not designed for such conditions. Water sloshes over the sides, mixing with the vomit on the floor. The men are soaked, cold, nauseated, terrified. Some have been seasick for hours and have nothing left in their stomachs to throw up. They dry heave miserably. This is not the glorious approach to battle depicted in movies and recruiting posters. This is industrial-scale misery. Men reduced to sick, frightened animals waiting for slaughter. Yet even in this state, they do not rebel or refuse. They sit and endure because they have been trained to endure, because their culture has told them this is what men do, because turning back is unthinkable. As dawn breaks, the men catch glimpses of the fleet around them through cracks in the boat's structure. The sight is both reassuring and terrifying. Hundreds of ships, thousands of landing craft, all moving toward France. They are not alone. But they are also not special. They are one small element in an enormous machine, expendable, replaceable. If their boat is hit, if all 12 die, the invasion will continue without pause. This knowledge is both comforting and horrifying. They matter to each other, but they do not matter to history. They are statistics waiting to be counted, names that will appear on casualty lists or survivor rosters. In 3 hours, some of them will be dead. Which ones? Private Baumgarten, the 19-year-old? Private Nash, the bar gunner? Sergeant Nance himself? There is no way to know, no pattern, no justice. The beach will decide randomly, and they must accept whatever verdict it delivers. At 6 a.m, the naval bombardment begins. The men inside the landing craft cannot see it, but they hear it, feel it, a rolling thunder that vibrates through the steel hull. Battleship shells scream overhead like freight trains. The men look at each other with something approaching hope. Surely nothing can survive that bombardment. Surely the German positions are being obliterated. The intelligence officer promised that bombardment would destroy most defences. The men believe it because they must believe something. The alternative, that they are heading into intact defences, is too terrible to contemplate. They cling to the hope that the beach will be softened, cratered, that German soldiers will be dead or stunned or fleeing. They do not know yet that the bombardment has failed, that the bombs have fallen miles inland, that the naval guns have barely scratched the concrete bunkers. They do not know that the beach awaiting them is almost exactly as strong as it was yesterday. They will learn this truth in 28 minutes, when the ramp drops and they step into history. January 15th, 1944, Norfolk House, London. General Omar Bradley stands before a wall-sized map of the French coast, studying a problem that has no good solution. He holds a pointer in his right hand, and he taps it against a stretch of beach marked in red. "Gentlemen," he says to the assembled staff officers, "this is Omaha Beach, I don't like it, but we need it. The room falls silent because everyone understands what Bradley means. Omaha is a natural killing ground, a 4-mile crescent of sand backed by 100-foot bluffs, offering attackers no cover and defenders perfect fields of fire. But it is also the only beach between Utah and Gold that can support the logistical demands of invasion. Without Omaha, the American and British sectors will be separated by a 20-mile gap, making mutual support impossible. Bradley's staff has analysed 7 alternative landing sites. All are worse. This is the calculus of amphibious assault. Choose between bad options and hope your men are good enough to overcome the terrain. The planning for Omaha reveals the cold mathematics that govern modern warfare. Lieutenant General Leonard Gero, commanding 5th Corps, presents casualty projections that make everyone in the room uncomfortable. 10 to 25% casualties in the first wave, he estimates, depending on the effectiveness of preliminary bombardment. If bombardment succeeds, 10%. If it fails, 25% or higher. The numbers are abstract until you calculate what they mean. Of the 1,450 men in the first wave, between 145 and 360 will be killed or wounded in the first hour. But the planners also know something that makes these casualties acceptable. Even with 25% losses, the mission can succeed, the beach can be taken, the invasion can proceed. This is the brutal logic that allows commanders to order men into battles they know will kill them. The objective is achievable, the cost is acceptable, the alternative is worse. Exercise Tiger, conducted at Slapton Sands in Devon in late April, reveals just how catastrophic the alternatives can be. The exercise is meant to be a full-scale rehearsal for Utah Beach, complete with live ammunition and naval bombardment. Instead, it becomes a disaster. German E-boats penetrate the exercise area and torpedo 2 LSTs, killing 749 American servicemen. The toll exceeds actual casualties on Utah Beach weeks later. The disaster is kept secret to prevent panic, but it teaches planners a harsh lesson. The journey to the beach is as dangerous as the beach itself. The English Channel is not a protected highway. It is a battlefield where U-boats and E-boats hunt Allied vessels, where mines drift in the current, where storms can sink landing craft. Getting 156,000 men across the channel will require not just courage, but luck. The final Neptune plan, approved in early May, reveals the scale of what is being attempted. 5 beaches, 55,000 men in the first wave, 11,000 vehicles in the first 24 hours. Omaha Beach will receive 2 regimental combat teams. The 16th Infantry from the 1st Division and the 116th Infantry from the 29th Division. These are good troops, the 1st Division veterans of North Africa and Sicily, the 29th fresh but well-trained. But even good troops have limits. The plan calls for them to land at low tide when obstacles are visible, cross 200 yards of open beach under fire, breach German defences at 5 exit points, and secure the bluffs within hours. Every element of this plan depends on preliminary bombardment destroying German positions. If bombardment fails, the plan has no backup. The troops will simply have to fight harder, die more, and win anyway. Tide calculations dominate the invasion timing. The planners need low tide so that obstacles are visible and can be cleared by engineers. But low tide at Omaha occurs at different times than at the British beaches. The invasion must be coordinated across all beaches, which means accepting that conditions at each will be less than optimal. The chosen time, H hour at 6:30 a.m., represents a compromise. Tide is rising but still low. Dawn is breaking but light is still dim. Naval bombardment can occur but must be brief. There is a 6.5-hour window between low tide and high tide when landing is feasible. Miss that window, and the invasion must be postponed 24 hours. With all the risks that delay entails, deteriorating weather, German discovery, loss of surprise, the entire invasion balances on this narrow temporal knife edge. Naval gunfire support plans call for a 40-minute bombardment before the landing. 329 ships will fire 15,000 tons of shells at German positions. It sounds overwhelming, but naval officers know it is marginal. The British beaches will receive 2 hours of bombardment. Omaha gets 40 minutes because of tide timing. The shells will come from battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, ranging from 5-inch to 14-inch caliber. In theory, this volume of fire should crater the beaches, destroy bunkers, kill defenders. In practice, naval guns firing from miles offshore at targets on high bluffs face severe limitations. The angle is too flat to penetrate concrete roofs. The targeting is imprecise without ground spotters. The brief duration means German soldiers in deep bunkers can simply shelter and emerge when firing stops, but these concerns are noted and set aside. The bombardment will proceed as planned, because there is no alternative. Artillery is expensive, infantry is cheaper. If the guns cannot silence the bunkers, riflemen will have to. Acceptable casualty thresholds are discussed with clinical detachment. Up to 30% losses in the first wave are considered sustainable if the beach is secured. This standard is based on historical analysis of amphibious assaults. Tarawa, Salerno, Anzio. In each case, attackers suffered terrible casualties but succeeded when they maintained momentum. The psychological assumption underlying these calculations is that American soldiers will continue to advance even when taking severe losses, that units will not break, that officers and NCOs will maintain control. This assumption is not unreasonable. American troops have proven resilient in previous battles. But it remains an assumption, a bet on human courage under the worst conditions imaginable. The planners are gambling that their men are as brave as they need them to be. Bradley confides his doubts to his aide in late May. "This is going to be the longest goddamn day in history," he says. He has studied the intelligence reports, the reconnaissance photographs, the casualty projections. He knows Omaha is the weak point in the entire invasion plan. If Omaha fails, if the troops are pinned on the beach or driven back into the sea, the entire invasion strategy collapses. The British and Canadian beaches will be isolated, vulnerable to German counterattack. The liberation of Europe could be delayed by months or even years. The political consequences of failure are unthinkable. Churchill's government might fall. Roosevelt's re-election could be jeopardized. Stalin might negotiate a separate peace with Germany. Everything depends on the men in the landing craft, on their ability to cross a few hundred yards of sand and climb 100 feet of bluff. The fate of nations rests on the backs of 19-year-olds like Harold Baumgarten. The logistics of death are meticulously planned. Medical units are positioned to receive casualties, with field hospitals established in England to handle thousands of wounded. Blood plasma has been stockpiled, morphine distributed to medics, graves, registration teams organised. The planners know men will die. They have quantified how many, estimated where, prepared to handle the bodies. This is the unsentimental reality of military operations. Death is a logistical problem that requires supply chains and transportation and administration. The men who will die are already accounted for in the paperwork, their deaths anticipated in casualty estimates, their bodies allocated to burial plots not yet dug. They march toward beaches that have already been designated as cemeteries. The final briefings occur in early June, when the invasion seems both imminent and impossible. Officers gather their men and tell them what to expect. Some are honest, a lot of you won't make it off the beach. Others are optimistic. The bombardment will have them running. Most fall somewhere between acknowledging danger while insisting on success. The soldiers listen and understand that they are being sent to die, or at least that some of them are. The question each man asks himself is whether he will be among the lucky or the doomed. There is no way to know. Survival on an invasion beach is largely random, determined by which boat lands where, which machine gun fires when, which shell lands precisely where you are standing. Skill and courage matter, but luck matters more. The soldiers sense this. They go forward anyway, not because they are heroes, but because retreat is impossible and delay only prolongs the agony. The arithmetic of death has been calculated. Now it must be tested. The planners have done their work. The dying remains to be done. June 5th, 1944, 10 o'clock in the evening. From the bridge of USS Augusta, Admiral Alan Kirk watches his radar screen with the intensity of a man reading scripture. The screen is speckled with green dots, each one representing a ship in the invasion fleet. They stretch for miles, a constellation of vessels moving in disciplined columns toward France. Kirk has commanded naval forces before, but never anything like this. 5,333 ships and landing craft, the largest armada ever assembled in human history. The destroyers and battleships are easy to track. The smaller landing craft appear and disappear from radar, their low profiles and wooden hulls barely registering. Kirk knows that out there in the darkness, in those invisible boats, are thousands of soldiers preparing for battles that will be fought without his participation. Once they land, they are beyond his reach. His job is to deliver them alive. After that, They belong to history. Below decks on LST-342, a different kind of preparation is underway. Chaplain John Daly, a Catholic priest from Boston, conducts midnight mass in a cargo hold designed for vehicles, not worship. 200 men cram into the space, standing shoulder to shoulder, many holding rosaries or prayer cards. Daly wears his vestments over his uniform. A surplice and stole that mark him as a man of God in a machine of war. He elevates the host and speaks the words of consecration, transforming bread into what these men believe is the body of Christ. They take communion with the solemnity of men who understand they may be dead by afternoon. Protestant services are held elsewhere on the ship. Jewish soldiers gather for their own prayers. The military has made space for all faiths tonight because it understands that fear transcends denomination. What the men need is not tactics or weapons, but the assurance that their deaths, if they die, will mean something beyond the merely strategic. At 2:30 in the morning, the sky above the fleet suddenly illuminates with flares and tracers. The airborne assault has begun. Paratroopers are dropping inland, C-47 transports visible as they cross the coast, their silhouettes backlit by anti-aircraft fire. The soldiers on the ships watch in awe and dread. Those are American boys up there, jumping into darkness over enemy territory, landing God knows where. Some will be killed before they touch ground. Others will land in flooded fields and drown in 3 feet of water, dragged down by their equipment. The airborne mission is to seize key bridges and road junctions to prevent German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. It is a mission born of desperation and courage, asking men to parachute into the unknown with only the weapons they carry. The soldiers on the ships feel a mixture of gratitude and guilt. Grateful they are not paratroopers. Guilty that other men are taking these risks while they ride in relative safety. USS Karmic, a destroyer, increases speed at 3:15 a.m., racing ahead of the landing craft to take up a bombardment position. Captain Lawrence Medill stands on the bridge, watching the coast materialize from the darkness. His ship is armed with 4 5-inch guns and torpedo tubes, more than enough firepower to devastate shore targets. But Medill knows that firepower without accuracy is useless. He will have perhaps 30 minutes to suppress German positions before the landing craft arrive. His gun crews are loading high explosive shells, setting fuses, preparing to fire at targets they cannot yet see. The shore is dark, silent, giving no indication that thousands of German soldiers wait in bunkers and trenches. Madel wonders if they know the fleet is coming. Surely German radar has detected this armada. Surely lookouts have seen something. The silence feels ominous, like the calm before a hurricane. First light comes at 4 o'clock, and the men on the ships see for the first time the scale of the force surrounding them. The English Channel is covered with vessels as far as the eye can see. Battleships and cruisers, destroyers and minesweepers, troop transports and hospital ships, landing craft of every size and configuration. The sight should be reassuring, proof that this invasion is unstoppable, that American industrial might has created a fleet beyond Germany's capacity to resist. But for the individual soldier in his landing craft, the size of the fleet is irrelevant. His war will be fought on a 50-yard stretch of beach. If he dies there, it will not matter that 5,000 ships supported him. The grand strategy that put him here will be meaningless. He will be alone with his fear and his weapon, and he will live or die based on factors he cannot control. The fleet is organised into task forces, each assigned to a specific beach. Force O, heading for Omaha Beach, consists of 934 vessels. Force U, heading for Utah, has another 865. The British and Canadian forces have their own task organisations. Each force moves through swept channels in the minefields, narrow paths cleared by minesweepers in the days before invasion. Deviating from these channels means risking mines, so the fleet moves in long single files, like trains on invisible tracks. Navigation is done by radar, compass, and dead reckoning. There are no lights, no beacons, nothing to guide the ships except their own instruments and the skill of their helmsmen. 195,700 naval personnel are involved in this crossing, a floating city moving through darkness toward combat. Weather conditions are marginal, force 5 winds creating 4 to 6 foot swells. This is at the edge of acceptable limits for small landing craft. Some boats are already taking on water, their pumps working continuously to keep them afloat. Soldiers in these boats stand in ankle-deep water, adding to their misery. The decision to launch was made by Eisenhower after agonizing consultation with meteorologists. The weather window is narrow, perhaps only 36 hours of acceptable conditions before the next storm system arrives. Postponing the invasion means waiting weeks for the next favorable tide cycle, with all the dangers that entails: German discovery, troop morale deterioration, security breaches. Eisenhower chose to go, accepting the weather risks. Now that decision is being tested by every wave that crashes into the landing craft, every boat that takes on water, every soldier who arrives at the beach soaked and exhausted. Inside the landing craft, the men are beyond fear now, numb with cold and seasickness and anticipation. They have been in these boats for 10 hours, pitching through heavy seas, soaked by spray, breathing diesel fumes and vomit. Some have achieved a kind of fatalistic calm, accepting that they have no control over what comes next. Others pray continuously, bargaining with God for survival. A few sleep, exhausted beyond fear. Most simply sit in miserable silence, watching the sky lighten, waiting for the moment when the ramp will drop and they will have to move. The dawn they are watching is the same dawn breaking over Germany, over England, over America. But for these men, it is the last dawn of innocence. Whatever happens in the next hours will divide their lives into before and after. They will either survive and carry these memories forever, or they will die and become memories for others. At 6 o'clock, the naval bombardment begins, and the night crossing transforms into something else, the beginning of battle. The men in the landing craft feel the concussion of battleship shells passing overhead, hear the roar of destroyers firing at close range. The horizon ahead lights up with explosions, orange flashes against the grey dawn. This is what they have been waiting for, the moment when the immense power of the fleet is finally unleashed against the enemy. The soldiers allow themselves to hope. Surely no one can survive that bombardment. Surely the Germans are being destroyed, their bunkers collapsing, their guns silenced. The men do not know that the bombs are falling miles inland, that the naval shells are mostly missing their targets, that the beach ahead is nearly as dangerous as it was yesterday. They will learn this truth soon enough. The landing craft make their final approach, 10,000 men in small steel boxes spread across 4 miles of ocean, all converging on a single beach. Each boat is a self-contained world, 12 or 30 or 50 men who share nothing except a common destination and a common fate. Some boats will land exactly where planned. Others will be carried by currents to wrong sectors. Some will be hit by artillery before reaching shore. Others will successfully discharge their men only to be destroyed on the return trip. There is no way to predict which boats will be lucky. The men inside do not think about odds or probabilities. They think about the ramp ahead, about the moment it will drop, about the fact that in minutes they will either be fighting or dying or running or hiding. The night crossing is over. The battle is beginning. And they are as ready as they will ever be, which is to say, not ready at all, but present and committed and beyond the point of no return. June 6th, 1944, 5:50 a.m. At 12,000 feet above the Normandy coast, 239 B-24 Liberator bombers of the 8th Air Force approach their targets in tight formation. Each aircraft carries 3,000 pounds of bombs, a payload meant to crater the beach defences below. Inside the lead aircraft, the bombardier leans over his Norden bomb site, trying to identify the target area through a solid cloud deck that covers the coast. The plan called for clear skies, for precision bombing that would drop high explosives directly onto German bunkers. Instead, the bombardiers see nothing but grey cloud, a blank canvas where targets should be. They have been briefed to use radar if visual bombing is impossible, but radar is imprecise, capable of accuracy measured in hundreds of yards, not tens. The mission is already compromised, but there is no provision to abort. The bombs must fall. At 5:58 a.m., 2 minutes before HR, when the first landing craft will reach the beach, the lead bombardier makes a fateful decision. He delays his bomb release by 30 seconds, fearing that dropping on radar coordinates might hit the incoming landing craft. It is a humane decision, an attempt to avoid killing American soldiers. Other bombardiers in the formation, seeing the lead aircraft delay, follow suit, assuming he has better information or clearer targets. The delay is transmitted through the formation like a wave. When the bombs finally fall, they impact 1 to 3 miles inland, far beyond the beach defences. From the ground, German soldiers in their bunkers hear the explosions, but feel no concussion, see no damage to their positions. 2,876 tons of bombs have been dropped with precision and care, and they have achieved absolutely nothing. At 6 o'clock, the naval bombardment commences, and this, at least, is visible, dramatic, seemingly devastating. USS Texas opens fire with its 9 14-inch guns, each shell weighing 1,500 pounds, capable of penetrating armor and concrete. USS Arkansas contributes 12-inch shells. Cruisers and destroyers unleash their 5-inch batteries in a continuous roar. The sound is apocalyptic, a rolling thunder that can be heard across the Channel in England. The men in the landing craft, still 3 miles from shore, watch the shoreline erupt in flame and smoke. This is the destructive power they have been promised, the steel rain that will suppress the enemy, the prelude to their assault. They believe in it because they must believe in something. Inside Widerstands Nest 62, the reality is different. Corporal Franz Gockel and his machine gun crew crouch in their bunker as naval shells impact around them. The concrete structure shakes with each near miss, dust falling from the ceiling, but the bunker itself is undamaged. The walls are 6 feet of reinforced concrete, designed by engineers who understood exactly what forces naval shells could deliver. A direct hit might damage it. Near misses merely create noise and fear. Gockel's bunker has been struck before, during test bombardments. It has survived. The German defenders know from experience that they can endure this. They wait in their shelters, letting the shells exhaust themselves against stone and earth. When the bombardment ends, they will emerge and man their weapons. This is the doctrine Rommel drilled into them. Survive the bombardment, then kill the infantry. The naval bombardment lasts 40 minutes, from 6 o'clock to 6:28 a.m. This duration is dictated by tide timing. Fire too long, and the landing craft will arrive at high tide when obstacles are submerged. Fire too briefly, and defences remain intact. 40 minutes is the compromise, but it is inadequate. British and Canadian beaches receive over 2 hours of bombardment because their tide timing allows it. Omaha receives what the schedule permits, not what the mission requires. Naval officers know this is insufficient. After-action reports will later note that at least 2 hours would have been needed to reliably destroy reinforced bunkers. But those reports will be written after men have died, when knowledge comes too late to matter. The problem is not just duration, but geometry. The German bunkers are positioned on bluffs overlooking the beach, their gun slits oriented parallel to the shore to provide enfilading fire. Naval guns, firing from ships miles offshore, deliver shells at a flat trajectory that strikes bunker walls and roofs obliquely. To penetrate the roof of a bunker requires a near vertical impact, what artillery calls plunging fire. Such fire can only be delivered by howitzers or aircraft, not by naval rifles firing from sea level. The gunners aboard the destroyers and battleships know their fire is largely ineffective against hardened targets. They are hoping for lucky hits, for shells that strike doorways or gun slits, for psychological effect on the defenders. They achieve some success. Communication trenches are collapsed, ammunition dumps detonated, some exposed positions destroyed. But the main bunkers, the ones with the machine guns that will kill hundreds, remain operational. At 6:15 a.m., German soldiers manning Widerstands Nest 62 feel the bombardment slacken. Lieutenant Frerking, commanding the position, gives orders to man the weapons. Crews emerge from sheltered areas and take up positions at the firing slits. Below them, the beach is shrouded in smoke and dust from the bombardment, but the obstacles are intact. The hedgehogs and Belgian gates stand undamaged. The mines remain in place. The wire is uncut. From the German perspective, the bombardment has been sound and fury, signifying nothing. They load belts into the MG-42 machine guns, adjust sights, and prepare to fire. Their orders are clear. Wait until the Americans reach the beach, let them cluster at the obstacles, then open fire. It is a battle plan of elegant simplicity and terrible effectiveness. The rocket ships, LCTRs, converted landing craft, carrying banks of rockets, make their run at 6:25 a.m. Each ship fires 9,000 rockets in a single salvo, a spectacular display that is supposed to saturate the beach with explosives. The rockets are unguided ballistic weapons that fly in flat trajectories toward shore. They look impressive, contrails filling the sky, impacts creating a wall of explosions. But 90% of the rockets fall short, detonating in the water or on the sand below the high water mark. The few that reach the German positions land randomly, without concentration. The rocket barrage, like the aerial bombing and naval gunfire before it, has failed to achieve its objective. The beach defences remain intact. At 6:28 a.m, the bombardment ends. An eerie silence falls over the beach, broken only by the sound of waves and the engines of approaching landing craft. The smoke begins to clear, revealing the bluffs, the bunkers, the obstacles. German soldiers peer through their gun slits and see what they have been trained to see. Landing craft approaching in waves, perfectly aligned, predictable. They do not fire yet. Discipline holds. They wait for the range to close, for targets to multiply, for the Americans to commit themselves completely. There is no hurry. The beach is wide and bare. There is nowhere for the attackers to hide. The Germans have rehearsed this moment for months. They know their fields of fire, their range cards, the precise points where crossfire will converge to create killing zones. They are ready. Aerial photographs taken after the battle will reveal the truth in stark detail. The beach defences are 98% intact. Of the 85 major strongpoints along Omaha Beach, 83 are operational when the first wave lands. The bombardment, planned with such care, executed with such resources, has failed almost completely. The failure is not due to cowardice or incompetence, but to the fundamental difficulty of destroying hardened defences from the air and sea. The bombs fell in the wrong place. The shells struck at the wrong angle. The rockets missed their targets. The infantry approaching the beach believe they are landing on a softened objective. They are wrong. They are landing on a fortress that has barely been scratched. The steel rain has fallen. The fortress awaits. And the men in the landing craft are about to learn that courage cannot overcome concrete. June 6, 1944, 6:30 a.m. The ramp drops on landing craft assault 9 to 10, and Sergeant Raynant steps into chest-deep water 50 yards from Easy Red sector of Omaha Beach. The water is shockingly cold, 48 degrees, and it surges against him with each wave. Behind him, his 12-man squad exits the boat in 2 files, trying to maintain formation as they were trained. Private Harold Baumgarten, the 19-year-old from the Bronx, is third out. He takes 4 steps into the water when a machine gun opens fire from the bluff. The sound is distinctive, a ripping noise like tearing cloth, impossibly fast. It is an MG-42, firing 1,200 rounds per minute, and it is aimed directly at the landing craft. Within 10 seconds, 5 of Sergeant Nance's 12 men are hit. Private Leo Nash, the bar gunner, is shot through the throat and disappears beneath the water. Private Robert Sales is hit in the chest and stomach. The water around the boat turns pink, then red. The survivors dive beneath the surface and try to swim. 300 yards to the west, Company A of the 116th Regiment is landing at Dog Green sector. Captain Taylor Fellers leads 96 men off 6 landing craft. The Germans have pre-sighted this exact location, designated it as a killing zone, and they execute their plan with methodical precision. 3 machine guns open fire simultaneously from Widerstands Nest 72. Mortar rounds begin falling within seconds, pre-registered on coordinates the Germans memorized weeks ago. Captain Fellers is hit in the head before reaching the beach. His executive officer is killed 10 seconds later. The men behind them are caught in the water, unable to advance, unable to retreat, simply standing and being shot. Within 15 minutes, 91 of the 96 men are casualties. Company A effectively ceases to exist as a fighting unit. The survivors who reach the shingle at the high water mark are too few and too shocked to organise. They lie behind a low stone seawall, pinned, unable to move. The DD tanks, the swimming Sherman tanks that were supposed to lead the assaults and provide covering fire, have already failed catastrophically. 32 tanks were launched from LCTs 6,000 yards offshore, far beyond the recommended distance. The sea is too rough, the waves too high. The canvas flotation screens that keep the tanks buoyant collapse under the pressure of the water. 27 of 32 tanks sink within minutes of launch. Crews escape from some, drowning in others, when hatches jam. The tanks that do reach the beach, only 5, arrive scattered and unsupported. They fire at German positions but are quickly targeted by anti-tank guns. One explodes when an 88mm shell penetrates its turret. The plan called for tanks to suppress bunkers while infantry advanced. Instead, the infantry advances alone, naked to enemy fire, without the armoured support that was supposed to save them. At 6:35 a.m, combat engineers wade ashore carrying explosives and Bangalore torpedoes to clear obstacles. This is perhaps the most dangerous job on the beach. The engineers must work in the open, under fire, placing charges on steel obstacles, while German machine guns specifically target them. Team after team is cut down. Explosive charges detonated by enemy fire kill engineers and nearby infantry indiscriminately. Other teams reach obstacles only to find that their explosive charges are waterlogged or that they have lost the detonators in the chaos of landing. Of 16 planned gaps through the obstacles, only 5 are cleared in the first hour. The unopened gaps force subsequent waves to land in the same congested areas, multiplying casualties as men pile up in kill zones. Private Harold Baumgarten reaches the water's edge and feels something strike his face with tremendous force. He falls, tasting blood, unsure if he has been shot or hit by shrapnel. His left cheek has been torn open by a bullet that passed through his face, missing his brain by inches. He can see the beach ahead through a haze of pain and shock. Bodies float in the surf. Men crawl toward the shingle. A soldier near him has been disemboweled, holding his intestines with both hands, screaming for a medic. Baumgarten tries to move forward, but his legs will not obey. He crawls instead, pulling himself through bloody water. His rifle lost, his only thought to reach cover. It takes him 10 minutes to crawl 50 yards. When he finally reaches the seawall, he collapses and discovers that 8 of his squad are dead or missing. Sergeant Nance is alive, directing the 4 other survivors to positions behind the wall. The German fire is not random. It is directed, coordinated, interlocking. Machine guns are positioned to create crossfire so that men seeking cover from one gun walk into fire from another. Mortars are pre-registered on the seawall, dropping shells precisely where men cluster for protection. The 88mm guns target vehicles and landing craft. Riflemen pick off individual soldiers who try to advance. This is the defence that Rommel designed, that German soldiers have rehearsed, that Allied intelligence documented but could not neutralise. The Americans are experiencing the difference between knowing about defences and assaulting them. The intelligence was accurate. The beach is exactly as deadly as the maps indicated. But maps cannot convey the visceral reality of bullets snapping past your head, of friends dying beside you, of water too deep and obstacles too thick and fire too intense. By 6:45 a.m, the first wave is shattered. Of the 1,450 men who landed in the first minutes, approximately 700 are casualties. Some companies have ceased to exist as organised units. Officers are dead, radios are waterlogged, communication with ships offshore is impossible. The beach is a scene of industrial-scale slaughter. Bodies washing in the tide, wounded men crying for help, medics working frantically despite being targeted themselves. Landing craft coxswains approaching the beach see the carnage and hesitate, unsure whether to land at all. Some veer off course, seeking safer sectors. Others discharge their troops hundreds of yards from shore, forcing men to wade through deep water under fire. The plan, the careful timetable, the assigned sectors all have dissolved into chaos. From Whitestan's Nest 62, Corporal Franz Gockel fires his MG-42 in disciplined bursts, traversing across the beach, shooting at anything that moves. His gun is fed by belts of ammunition, that his loader changes every 50 rounds. The barrel is heating rapidly, glowing dull red. He will have to change it soon or risk it jamming. But the targets are so numerous that he cannot stop. Americans are everywhere, coming out of the water, crawling toward the shingle, clustering behind obstacles. He fires, reloads, fires again. Next to him, another machine gunner does the same. Together they are creating a curtain of bullets that no one can pass through. Gockel feels no hatred for the Americans, no bloodlust, just the mechanical focus of a craftsman doing his job. He has been trained for this, his gun has been sighted for this, everything is going according to plan. At 7 o'clock, the second wave lands and discovers that the first wave has not advanced. Instead of moving inland as planned, the survivors are pinned at the water's edge. The second wave lands among the first wave's casualties in sectors that are still under heavy fire, adding their bodies to the growing carnage. Some boats land on obstacle-blocked sectors and are destroyed, their ramps dropping onto mines or their hulls torn open by hedgehogs. Other boats disgorge men directly into deep water, where they sink, pulled under by their equipment. The beach is becoming not just a battlefield but a graveyard, a place where the machinery of modern warfare processes men into corpses with industrial efficiency. Medical personnel wade ashore and immediately become casualties themselves. The Geneva Convention prohibits targeting medics, but there is no way to distinguish medics from riflemen in the chaos, and some German soldiers do not care. Medics work in the open, dragging wounded men to cover, applying tourniquets, administering morphine. Some are shot while treating patients. Others continue working despite being wounded themselves. One medic, whose name will be lost to history, treats 14 men before being killed by a mortar round. Another uses his own body to shield a wounded soldier and is shot 3 times, surviving only because the bullets miss vital organs. The heroism on the beach is universal and useless. Courage cannot stop bullets. Bravery cannot change the fundamental calculus that attacking prepared defences across open ground means dying in great numbers. By 7:30 a.m, the invasion of Omaha Beach appears to be failing. No significant penetration of German defences has been achieved. The exit draws that lead off the beach remain in German hands. Vehicles cannot move inland. Artillery cannot be landed. Reinforcements continue to arrive, but they simply add to the congestion and casualties. On ships offshore, commanders monitoring radio traffic realize something has gone catastrophically wrong. The reports are fragmentary and terrifying. Heavy casualties, objectives not taken, men pinned down. General Omar Bradley, aboard USS Augusta, considers ordering a halt to the landing and diverting follow-on waves to Utah or British beaches, but he does not. To abandon Omaha means abandoning the dead and wounded, means leaving a hole in the invasion front, means admitting defeat. The landing continues. More men come ashore. More men die. And slowly, invisibly, against all probability, something begins to change. The first wave has died, but it has not surrendered. And in that refusal to quit, in the stubborn endurance of men who will not accept defeat, lies the seed of eventual victory. 7:30 a.m, Omaha Beach. Colonel George Taylor of the 16th Infantry Regiment wades ashore and takes cover behind the seawall at Easy Red Sector. Around him lie wounded and dead soldiers, some from his regiment, others from units he does not recognize. Men are cowering behind the wall, paralyzed by fear and shock. No one is moving forward. No one is returning fire. They are simply surviving, moment by moment, hoping the naval barrage will resume and the German fire will stop. Taylor realizes instantly that the invasion is stalling, that unless someone acts, the men will stay pinned until German counterattack drives them back into the sea. He stands up, exposing himself to fire, and shouts words that will be repeated in history books for decades. 2 kinds of people are staying on this beach, those who are dead and those who are going to die. Now let's get the hell out of here. It is not eloquence that moves men, but fury and certainty. Taylor does not ask them to advance. He orders it, he expects it, and men respond. 300 yards east, Lieutenant John Spaulding faces a different problem. He commands a platoon from E Company, 16th Infantry, and they have made it to the shingle relatively intact, only 3 casualties during the landing. But before them lies a minefield, marked with German warning signs, and beyond that the bluff they must climb. Spaulding has studied the maps. He knows there is a cattle path that runs through the minefield, a narrow trail used by French farmers before the war. If the path still exists, it should be safe from mines. It is an enormous gamble. The maps could be wrong. The Germans could have mined the path, but staying on the beach means death from mortars and machine guns. Spaulding makes his decision. He leads his men through the minefield in single file, stepping carefully, each man following in the footsteps of the man ahead. 32 soldiers cross safely. They are the first Americans to breach the bluff intact as a unit. At 8 o'clock, Bangalore torpedoes finally succeed in clearing paths through German wire obstacles. A Bangalore is a long tube, packed with explosives, sections that can be connected and pushed under wire, then detonated to create a gap. Throughout the morning, engineers have tried to employ these weapons, but have been killed while assembling them. Now, in several locations simultaneously, the torpedoes are successfully positioned and blown. The explosions tear apart German wire, creating paths perhaps 6 feet wide. They are not large gaps, but they are enough. Lieutenant Stanley Schwartz leads 50 men from scattered units through one gap at WN64 draw. They climb the bluff in a ragged line, using whatever cover they can find, firing at German positions above them. Some are hit and tumble back down, others keep climbing. The ascent takes 20 minutes and costs 18 casualties, but they reach the top and find themselves behind German forward positions. The destroyers offshore have been watching the disaster unfold with increasing desperation. Captain Lawrence Medill, commanding USS McCook, makes a decision that violates his orders but may save the invasion. He orders his ship to close to 800 yards from shore, near enough to risk grounding, close enough to bring direct fire onto German bunkers. Other destroyer captains make similar decisions. USS Carmick, USS Doyle, USS Frankfurt all move dangerously close to shore and begin firing at point-blank range against specific bunkers identified by their muzzle flashes. This close-range naval gunfire proves devastatingly effective. 5-inch shells fired at nearly flat trajectory smash directly into bunker embrasures. The destroyers are exposed and vulnerable, but they accept the risk because the alternative is watching American soldiers die. Several destroyers are hit by German return fire but continue firing. Their intervention does not stop all German guns, but it suppresses enough to create opportunities for infantry to advance. At 8:30 a.m., ammunition begins to run short in German positions. The MG-42 machine guns have been firing almost continuously for 2 hours. Each gun has expended thousands of rounds. Some barrels have overheated and warped, reducing accuracy. Ammunition belts are being pulled from reserve stocks. Worse, the American naval gunfire has destroyed some ammunition bunkers and blocked communication trenches that would allow resupply. Corporal Gockel at WN62 changes his 5th barrel of the morning and realizes his ammunition supply is finite. He begins firing in shorter bursts, conserving bullets, selecting targets more carefully. This slight slackening of fire, this shift from continuous saturation to selective engagement, creates brief windows when Americans can move. It is not much, but desperation makes men exploit the smallest advantages. Sergeant Philip Stretchick leads an ad hoc assault team against WN65, a bunker complex that has been killing Americans all morning. His team consists of men from 3 different companies who have found each other in the chaos. They have no officer, no radio, no communication with higher command. But they have grenades and rage, and the knowledge that staying pinned means dying slowly. They work their way up a communication trench, crawling when under fire, rushing when the fire slackens. At the bunker entrance, Stretchick pulls the pin on a fragmentation grenade, counts to 3, and throws it through the gun slit. The explosion inside is muffled but final. The machine gun stops firing. The team moves to the next bunker and repeats the process. It is ugly, close-range combat, fighting through trenches and bunkers, but it is the only way to eliminate positions that are immune to bombardment. By 9 o'clock, approximately 600 Americans have infiltrated the bluff at 5 separate points. They are not operating as a coordinated force. They are small groups, squads and platoons, acting independently, each attacking whatever German position they encounter. There is no grand plan, no central coordination, but the cumulative effect is devastating to German defence. The strongpoints are designed to fire on the beach, not to defend against attack from behind. Once Americans reach the high ground, they can approach bunkers from the rear, from blind spots the designers did not anticipate. German defenders find themselves fighting in 2 directions, the beach in front and infiltrators behind. The defence begins to crack not from overwhelming force but from positional collapse. The leadership vacuum created by the death of so many officers has produced an unexpected result. Initiative has devolved to junior leaders who adapt faster than senior commanders could. Lieutenants make tactical decisions without waiting for orders. Sergeants organise men from shattered units into composite teams. Even privates, finding themselves leaderless, join nearby groups and contribute. This is the American military at its best, educated and trained to think independently, capable of functioning despite chaos. It is also desperation. The men advance, not from courage alone, but from the recognition that the beach is a death trap, that the only safety lies inland, that moving forward is the only rational choice when staying put means dying. At 9:30 a.m., Colonel Taylor establishes a crude command post in a crater 100 yards inland from the beach. He has gathered officers from multiple units and is attempting to coordinate the piecemeal attacks into something resembling a plan. The primary objective is the exit draws the roads that lead off the beach inland. Without these exits open, vehicles and artillery cannot move forward. Tanks are still stuck on the beach, unable to climb the bluff except at specific points. Taylor designates teams to assault each draw, not as formal orders through a chain of command, but as direct conversations with officers standing beside him. You, Captain, take your men to exit done. Clear it. I don't care how. It is command reduced to its essentials. Identify the objective, assign responsibility, trust subordinates to figure out execution. The fighting becomes personal and brutal as Americans infiltrate German positions. Bunkers that are impervious to artillery fall to grenades thrown through firing slits. German soldiers, isolated in their positions, face the choice of fighting to death or surrender. Some fight, some surrender, some flee through communication trenches toward rear positions. American soldiers, many of whom have never killed anyone before today, discover the grim satisfaction of destroying the bunkers that killed their friends. There is little mercy in these close combats. German soldiers attempting to surrender are sometimes shot by Americans enraged by casualties. Other Germans are taken prisoner and sent stumbling back toward the beach under guard. The battlefield morality is simple: resist and die, surrender and possibly live. The Germans who have killed Americans all morning now discover that their fortress has become their trap. By 10 o'clock, the crisis has passed, though few on the beach realize it yet. The infiltration of the bluff, the suppression of key bunkers, the exhaustion of German ammunition, all combine to shift the tactical balance. German fire slackens noticeably. Americans move with greater freedom. Subsequent waves land with dramatically lower casualties than the first, and second waves suffered. The beach remains dangerous, mortars still fall randomly, snipers still shoot, but it is no longer the impassable killing ground it was at H hour. The invasion has been saved not by the plan working, but by the plan failing, and individual soldiers refusing to accept failure. A dozen small decisions, made by men whose names will mostly be forgotten, had prevented disaster. They did not win the battle through brilliant tactics or superior firepower. They won by surviving, by adapting, by moving forward when every instinct screamed to hide. They are not the heroes of legend, not superhuman. They are ordinary men who did extraordinary things because the alternative was unthinkable. May 15th, 1944, 3 weeks before D-Day. An Allied intelligence report crosses the desk of analysts at SHA-EF headquarters in London. The document, compiled from aerial reconnaissance and resistance sources, notes that the 352nd Infantry Division has been identified near Streetlow, 20 miles inland from the Normandy coast. The assessment is marked not confirmed because the evidence is circumstantial. Radio intercepts suggesting regimental designations, reports from French civilians of troop movements, photographs showing vehicle concentrations consistent with a division-sized unit. The analysts debate significance. A division at Streetlow is outside the immediate combat zone. Even if it moves toward the coast, it would take hours to reach defensive positions. The report is filed with hundreds of other intelligence updates, noted but not alarming. The planning for Omaha Beach proceeds based on the assumption that only the 716th Static Division, a low-grade unit, will defend the beaches directly. What the intelligence fails to capture is a quiet German redeployment in early June. General Kreis, commanding the 352nd Division, receives orders to move his forward units into coastal defense positions. This is not a full division movement that would generate massive vehicle traffic and radio transmissions. It is a subtle shift, battalions moving at night, using secondary roads, maintaining radio silence. By June 4th, elements of the 352nd are occupying positions directly overlooking Omaha Beach. Specifically, the strongpoints designated WN60 through WN70. These are not the old men and foreign conscripts of the 716th. These are combat veterans, survivors of the Eastern Front, men who have learned warfare fighting the Red Army. They bring with them a level of competence and determination that will transform Omaha from a difficult objective into a bloodbath. The 352nd Infantry Division has a history that makes it formidable. Formed in 1934, it fought in Poland, France, and Russia. It participated in Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, and survived the brutal combat of the Eastern Front, where divisions were routinely destroyed. The men of the 352nd have seen warfare at its most pitiless. They have defended against Soviet human wave attacks. They have fought in cities reduced to rubble. They have learned to kill efficiently and to survive against odds. When they arrive in Normandy for rest and refit, they bring this experience with them. They are not supermen, but they are professionals, and on June 6th they will demonstrate the difference between garrison troops and combat troops. Lieutenant Bernhard Frerking commands Whitestan's Nest 62, the strong point that will inflict more American casualties than any other position on Omaha Beach. Frerking is 24 years old, a veteran of 2 years on the Eastern Front. He has trained his 40-man garrison relentlessly since arriving at the position. They conduct fire drills, practice ammunition, resupply, memorize range cards that tell them exactly where to aim for different sectors of the beach. Frerking does not believe the propaganda about the Atlantic Wall being impregnable. He knows from experience that determined attackers will eventually penetrate any defense. But he also knows that well-prepared defenders can extract a terrible price before being overrun. His orders are simple: inflict maximum casualties, delay the enemy as long as possible, and if overrun, retreat to secondary positions. It is a doctrine of trading American lives for German time. The Americans landing at Omaha on June 6th expect to face one weak division spread across 4 miles of coast. Instead, they encounter portions of 2 divisions, the static 716th providing manpower and the veteran 352nd providing skill and leadership. The 352nd occupies the most critical positions, the strong points that overlook the natural exit draws where Americans must advance. This is not coincidental. German defensive doctrine places the best troops at the most important locations. The result is that American infantry, expecting minimal resistance after the bombardment, instead confronts the most competent defenders Germany can field in the West. The intelligence failure is not one of general ignorance but of specific timing. Allied command knows the 352nd exists. They simply do not know it has moved forward until soldiers report being fired upon by troops who fight with a skill that garrison troops do not possess. At 5 o'clock on the morning of June 6th, soldiers of the 352nd wake in their bunkers overlooking Omaha Beach. Some have slept in their positions, too anxious to retire to rear areas. They perform morning routines, check weapons, eat cold rations, smoke cigarettes in the pre-dawn darkness. Frerking moves through WN62, conducting final inspections, ensuring ammunition is accessible, that machine gun fields of fire are clear, that rangefinders are calibrated. At 5:50 a.m., the sky fills with the sound of bombers. The men take cover, bracing for the bombardment they know must come. When the bombs fall harmlessly inland, there is a moment of confused relief, followed by grim satisfaction. The Americans have missed. The battle will be fair after all. When the landing craft appear offshore at 6:15 a.m., German observers count them and realize the scale of what is coming. Radio reports go up the chain of command: massive invasion force, hundreds of craft, estimated division strength or greater. General Crace, at division headquarters 5 miles inland, receives these reports and understands immediately that this is the invasion, not a feint or raid. He orders all units to combat stations and requests permission to commit his reserves. But the German command structure is paralysed by Hitler's standing order that armour reserves cannot be released without his personal authorisation. Crace has infantry reserves. He can commit, but they are miles away, and movement during daylight under Allied air supremacy is near suicidal. The 352nd must fight with the forces already in position. The German defenders at WN62 open fire at 6:30 a.m. as soon as American infantry enter the water. Unteroffizier Heinz Sevelo, manning an MG-42, begins firing methodical bursts. He will later claim, in memoirs written decades later, to have fired 12,000 rounds and killed hundreds of Americans. The claim is unverifiable but not impossible. An experienced machine gunner with ample ammunition, firing at mass targets at predictable ranges, can achieve horrific results. Sevelo's gun position has been carefully prepared with pre-measured aiming stakes that allow him to direct fire accurately without exposing himself. He traverses methodically across the beach, firing at clusters of men, at soldiers seeking cover behind obstacles, at anyone who moves. Beside him, another gunner does the same. Together, they create a beaten zone, an area where machine gun fire is so dense that movement is suicide. By 8 o'clock, American commanders on ships offshore begin to receive reports that suggest something unexpected is happening. The casualties are higher than projected. The resistance is fiercer than anticipated. Units report being pinned by heavy, accurate fire, not the sporadic resistance expected from a low-grade division. Some officers begin to suspect what intelligence could not confirm. The Germans defending Omaha are better than expected. This realization comes too late to change the initial assault, but shapes subsequent decisions. Reinforcements are diverted to Omaha from other beaches. Naval gunfire is concentrated on suppressing German positions. The recognition that the enemy is competent forces adjustments in tactics and expectations. The 352nd Division does not save Omaha Beach for Germany. By afternoon, their ammunition is exhausted, their positions are being overrun, and their commanders have lost communication with isolated strongpoints. But they make the Americans pay a price far higher than planning anticipated. The division demonstrates that even in 1944, even against overwhelming material superiority, skilled defenders can turn a beach into a slaughter pen. Of the 2,400 American casualties at Omaha on June 6th, perhaps 60% are inflicted by the 352nd. The division that was not supposed to be there, that intelligence missed or misjudged, becomes the reason Omaha is remembered as D-Day's closest brush with disaster. The intelligence failure is not catastrophic because American soldiers overcome it through individual courage. But it is a failure nonetheless, a reminder that even the best intelligence leaves gaps, and those gaps are filled with blood. 10 o'clock a.m., Omaha Beach. Exit done. The Vierville draw has been under assault for 3 hours. This narrow ravine cutting through the bluff is vital because it is the only route in the western sector where vehicles can climb from the beach to the interior. German defenders have fortified it with mines, wire, and a strong point designated WN-72 that dominates the approach. Repeated American attacks have been repulsed with heavy casualties. But at 10 a.m., a composite force of Rangers and infantry from the 29th Division finally breaches the German position through a combination of naval gunfire and close assault. Lieutenant Colonel Max Schneider leads the final push personally, his men fighting through trenches with grenades and rifle fire. When WN-72 falls, the draw is suddenly vulnerable. Engineers rush forward to clear mines and wire. By 10:30 a.m., the first vehicles begin climbing off the beach. The breach is narrow, precarious, but it exists. Omaha is no longer an impassable barrier. 3 miles east, at Exit Eone, near Colleville, a different kind of breakthrough is occurring. This draw has been less heavily defended because German planners considered it a secondary route. American infantry infiltrating in small groups throughout the morning have gradually accumulated on the bluffs above the draw. At 11 o'clock, these dispersed forces spontaneously coordinate an assault without any central command. 3 separate groups attack the German position from 3 directions simultaneously. The defenders, already low on ammunition and isolated by the infiltration, collapse quickly. Within 20 minutes, the draw is in American hands. Engineers move in to clear obstacles. By noon, artillery pieces are being manhandled up the steep path, the first heavy weapons to move inland. The 2 exits, Dunn and Eone, become arteries through which reinforcements and supplies flow. At 11:30 a.m., combat engineers finally complete the demolition work they were supposed to finish in the first hour. With German fire significantly reduced, they systematically destroy beach obstacles using explosives and bulldozers. The work is still dangerous, mines detonate, killing engineers, and occasional sniper fire claims victims. But the scale of work achieved between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. is remarkable. Lanes are cleared through the obstacles at 6 locations. The lanes are marked with buoys and flags. Incoming landing craft now have designated paths to the beach, dramatically reducing the chaos that characterized the morning. LSTs, the large landing ship tanks, beach for the first time at high tide, disgorging vehicles directly onto the sand. The beach is transforming from a graveyard into a functioning supply depot. At noon, Wider Stand's Nest 62, the strong point that has killed more Americans than any other, finally falls. Lieutenant Spaulding's platoon approaches from the rear, the blind spot the bunker's designers never adequately defended. They work their way through communication, trenches, throwing grenades, firing rifles into embrasures. Inside the bunker, Lieutenant Frerking recognizes the position is untenable. He orders his surviving men to evacuate through a rear trench. 21 Germans are captured when the evacuation is discovered. Frerking and 19 others escape to secondary positions a half-mile inland. The fall of WN-62 is both symbolic and practical. It has been the most lethal position on the beach. Its silence means the killing has dramatically slowed. At 1:00 p.m., General Clarence Hubner, commanding the 1st Infantry Division, wades ashore and establishes a command post in a shell crater 50 yards from the water's edge. His arrival signals a crucial transition. For the first time since H Hour, a general officer is physically present on the beach, able to observe conditions directly and issue orders based on reality, rather than fragmentary radio reports. Hubner surveys the scene. Thousands of men crowded on the beach, vehicles clustering at the exits, wounded being treated in improvised aid stations. He makes immediate decisions. Prioritize ammunition and water for troops already inland. Push follow-on units directly to the bluffs rather than staging on the beach. Establish traffic control to prevent congestion at the exits. Command and control, absent all morning, begins to reassert itself. By 2:00 p.m., the character of the battle has fundamentally changed. German defensive fire, intense and lethal at H Hour, has diminished to sporadic resistance. Ammunition shortages, casualties, and the infiltration of American troops behind strongpoints have broken the coherent defense. Individual German positions continue to fight, but they are isolated, unable to support each other, gradually being eliminated. American casualties in waves landing after 1 p.m. are 50% lower than casualties in the first wave. This dramatic reduction in lethality is the clearest measure that the battle has turned. The beach is still dangerous. Men still die from mortar fire and mines. But it is no longer the killing ground it was 6 hours earlier. German casualties by mid-afternoon are approximately 1,200 killed or captured. This number is significant because the German force defending Omaha totaled perhaps 4,000 men, meaning roughly 30% have been eliminated. More importantly, the survivors are demoralized and exhausted. They have fought without air support, without armor support, with minimal artillery support. They have seen the overwhelming scale of American resources and recognize that defeat is inevitable. Some positions receive orders to retreat to secondary defensive lines. Others are simply abandoned as soldiers flee inland. The Atlantic Wall at Omaha has been breached, not through overwhelming force in a single blow, but through cumulative pressure that eventually cracks the defense. By 3:00 p.m., American artillery batteries are being established on the bluffs overlooking the beach. These are towed 105mm howitzers, manhandled into position by crews who have spent hours moving them up from the beach. The first guns open fire at German positions inland, marking a psychological turning point. For the first time today, Americans are delivering fire inland, rather than receiving it from inland. The artillerymen work with grim satisfaction, remembering the hours they spent pinned on the beach. Each shell they fire is revenge for the morning's slaughter. The establishment of artillery also means that American forces on Omaha are transitioning from survival to offense, from defensive posture to aggressive advance. 18,000 American soldiers are now on Omaha Beach, and the beachhead extends approximately 1.5 miles inland in most sectors. This is far short of the D-Day objectives, which call for penetrations of 5 to 6 miles, but it is enough. The lodgment is secure. German counterattack, if it comes, will face not scattered survivors, but an organized force with artillery support and growing numbers. The vulnerability window, the hours when the invasion could have been defeated, has closed. What began as potential disaster has become hard-won success. At 4:00 p.m., the fifth wave lands with casualties so low that men comment on the eeriness of walking across the beach unmolested. The obstacles have been cleared. The bunkers have been silenced. The beach looks like a battlefield aftermath rather than an active combat zone. Bodies still lie in the surf. Equipment is scattered everywhere. Wrecks landing, craft litter the waterline. But living men can now cross with reasonable expectation of survival. This transformation from impassable to passable, from death trap to doorway, is what the entire day has been about. Omaha Beach has not been conquered easily or cheaply, but it has been conquered. The invasion will continue. June 6th, 1944, 8:00 p.m. The sun sets over Omaha Beach, painting the water gold and red, colours that seem obscenely beautiful after the day's horror. Medics continue working by flashlight, moving among the wounded who still lie on the beach, waiting for evacuation. Private Harold Baumgarten, his face bandaged but alive, sits against the seawall trying to comprehend that he has survived. Around him are men in various states of shock, some sleeping, some staring at nothing, some weeping quietly. The beach that was chaos and noise for 12 hours is now strangely quiet, except for the sound of waves and occasional cries from the wounded. The living have moved inland. The dead remain, rows of bodies covered with ponchos or shelter halves, waiting for graves registration teams to begin the grim accounting. Sergeant Ray Nance searches for his squad in the gathering darkness. He moves through groups of soldiers, asking about men from Company B, 116th Regiment. He finds Private Sales, wounded but alive, being treated at an aid station. He finds Private Baumgarten at the seawall, but of his 12-man squad, 8 are dead or missing. Leo Nash, the BAR gunner, drowned in the first seconds. 3 others were killed crossing the beach. 3 more are missing, possibly dead but bodies not yet found, possibly wounded and evacuated. Nance sits down heavily, suddenly exhausted by more than physical fatigue. He has led these men for 18 months. He knew their families, their girlfriends, their fears, and in 6 hours they were erased. He will have to write letters to their mothers. He will have to explain why their sons died on a beach in France. He does not know what he will say. At 9:00 p.m, graves registration teams begin the task that will consume the next week, identifying and burying the dead. The teams move methodically across the beach, checking bodies for identification tags, recording names and serial numbers, searching for personal effects to return to families. Some bodies are easy to identify. Others have been so badly wounded that identification is difficult or impossible. The teams work without emotion, because emotion would make the work impossible. They are processing remains, not mourning individuals. That will come later for those who knew them. For now, the dead must be counted, catalogued, removed from the beach so that operations can continue. American doctrine is clear: dead soldiers must be identified and buried with dignity. Even in the chaos of invasion, this duty is not neglected. Company A, 116th Regiment, ceases to exist as a fighting unit tonight. Of 96 men who landed at Dog Green at H hour, 91 are casualties. 5 survivors are being consolidated into other companies. The unit will be reconstituted with replacements, but these specific men, this specific company that trained together for years, is gone. Military organisations speak of units as if they are immortal, as if a company is an entity that persists regardless of personnel. But soldiers know better. Company A died today. What will carry the same designation tomorrow will be a different company, composed of different men who did not share today's experience. The institutional memory of the slaughter will fade as replacements arrive who were not there. Medical facilities on the beach are overwhelmed with wounded. 500 men await evacuation, lying on stretchers or sitting in makeshift aid stations. Medics perform triage, marking men for immediate evacuation, delayed evacuation, or expectant care, the gentle euphemism for dying beyond help. The seriously wounded are loaded onto returning landing craft for transport to hospital ships offshore. The walking wounded are treated and sent back to their units. Some men with relatively minor injuries refuse evacuation, not from heroism, but from reluctance to leave their friends. Others, badly wounded, insist they can still fight, not understanding the severity of their injuries until they try to stand and collapse. The medics work with practiced efficiency, having done this before in North Africa and Sicily, knowing that medical care in combat is about saving as many as possible, not about saving everyone. At 10:00 p.m, German artillery opens fire on the beach, the first sustained bombardment since the morning. Shells land randomly, killing and wounding men who survived the morning's battle. This is vindictive fire, German batteries that spent the day hiding from Allied counter-battery fire, now shooting at a target they cannot see. The bombardment achieves little military purpose, but adds to the day's casualties. Men dig into the sand or press themselves into craters, cursing the Germans, cursing the war, cursing their fortune. The shelling lasts 30 minutes before Allied counter-battery fire silences the German guns. The beach falls quiet again, but sleep is difficult. Everyone expects a German counterattack at dawn, a final attempt to drive the invaders back into the sea. 15 miles inland, Field Marshal Rommel is driving frantically back toward Normandy from Germany, where he travelled for his wife's birthday. He left France on June 5th, assured by meteorologists that the weather was too poor for invasion. He spent June 6th in Germany, learning of the invasion by telephone, racing back to take command. Now, in the middle of the night, he drives through darkened French roads, trying to reach his headquarters, trying to understand what has happened. Reports are fragmentary and contradictory. Some say the invasion has been contained, others suggest disaster. Rommel knows from experience that the first reports are always wrong, but he also knows that if the Allies have established a beachhead, if they have survived the first day, then Germany has lost the strategic initiative. The Atlantic War was designed to win on D-Day or not at all. If it has failed, there is no second chance. At 11 p.m, exhausted American soldiers sleep in foxholes and hedgerows a mile inland from the beach. They have fought for 17 hours, most without food or rest. Some sleep sitting up, too tired to lie down. Others cannot sleep despite exhaustion, adrenaline, and shock keeping them wakeful. They are intermixed, scattered, companies and platoons fragmented and reassembled into improvised units. Officers are still trying to determine who survived, which units are intact, what tomorrow's objectives should be. The confusion is enormous, but it is manageable confusion. The beachhead is secure. Reinforcements are landing. The battle has been won, though at a cost that will not be fully understood for days. At 2 o'clock in the morning on June 7th, a strange quiet settles over Omaha Beach. The shelling has stopped. The last landing craft of the day have departed. The wounded have been evacuated or are being treated. Thousands of men sleep on the sand or in positions just inland. The beach is littered with the debris of battle, wrecked landing craft, abandoned equipment, shell craters, blood-stained sand. But it is no longer a battlefield. It is becoming a supply depot, a highway, a doorway to Europe. Engineers are already working to improve the exits, to create roads, to establish dumps for ammunition and fuel. The invasion continues, not with dramatic action but with logistics, with the unglamorous work of moving supplies and men inland. At dawn on June 7th, soldiers wake expecting German counterattack. It never comes. German forces are in disarray, their reserves delayed by Hitler's refusal to release armour without his permission. Their communications disrupted by Allied air attacks. The moment when a concentrated German assault might have driven the Americans back into the sea has passed. The Allies are too strong, too well supplied, too numerous. The battle for Omaha Beach is over. The battle for Normandy is beginning. But for the men who landed yesterday, who survived the slaughter, who watched friends die, the war has become personal in a way it was not before. They have seen what modern warfare does to human bodies. They have learned that courage does not prevent death, that plans fail, that survival is largely luck. They are veterans now, initiated into a brotherhood of violence that will mark them for life. They do not know it yet, but they will carry Omaha Beach with them forever, in nightmares and silences, in the refusal to speak of what they saw, in the sudden tears that will come decades later when they remember faces and names and moments they cannot forget. June 6th, 1944, 6:30 a.m. Grenadier Franz Gockel peers through the firing slit of his machine gun position at Widderstands Nest 62 and feels something between exhilaration and dread. The beach below is filled with Americans, hundreds of them, emerging from landing craft, wading through the surf, perfect targets, against the pale sand. He opens fire with his MG-42, the weapon chattering in short bursts. Through the gun smoke, he sees men fall, sees others dive for cover behind obstacles, sees the water churn with impacts. His training is automatic. Traverse, left, fire. Traverse, right, fire, reload, repeat. The Americans seem endless. For every one that falls, 2 more come ashore. But they are dying in great numbers, and Gockel allows himself to believe that the defences will hold, that the Atlantic Wall is proving itself, that Germany will win this battle. Beside Gockel, Unteroffizier Hein, Sevelo operates another MG-42 with the mechanical precision of a craftsman. Sevelo is 21 years old, a farm boy from Lower Saxony, trained for this moment through months of repetition. He has memorised the ranges to various points on the beach. He knows that the waterline is 250 metres, The shingle is 300 meters. The seawall is 350 meters. He does not aim at individual soldiers, but at areas, zones where soldiers must pass or gather. He fires, watches the fall of shot, adjusts, fires again. His loader feeds ammunition belts continuously. The barrel of his gun glows red hot. He will change it 3 times in the first hour. Around him, other gun positions contribute their fire, creating overlapping fields that make the beach a kill zone. This is what they trained for. This is what the bunker was designed for. And it is working exactly as planned. At 7:30 a.m., the Americans are still dying, but something begins to change. Sevelo notices that some landing craft are turning back, refusing to come in close. Others are disgorging men far from shore, forcing them to swim or wade. The Americans are adapting, learning, becoming harder to kill. Worse, German ammunition consumption is enormous. Each MG42 fires 800 to 1200 rounds per minute. In an hour, a single gun can expend 70,000 rounds, if firing continuously. The ammunition stockpiled in the bunker is vast but finite. Sevelo calculates mentally, at this rate, they have perhaps 3 more hours before supplies run critically low. He mentions this to his squad leader, who waves off the concern. Resupply, he is told, will come through the communication trenches. Sevelo is not reassured. The bombardment has collapsed some trenches. He has heard no word from command since the battle began. At 8 o'clock, Sevelo experiences the first truly frightening moment of the morning. A naval shell strikes the bunker directly. The impact sounds like the world ending, a concussion that momentarily deafens everyone inside. Dust and concrete chips fill the air. For 30 seconds, no one can see or hear. Then the dust settles, and Sevelo realizes the bunker is intact. The shell gouged concrete but did not penetrate. The 6-foot-thick walls have done their job, but the psychological effect is profound. If the Americans can bring naval guns to bear on the bunker, if they can target it directly, then survival is no longer certain. The next shell might penetrate, or the one after that. Sevelo returns to his gun and continues firing, but the exhilaration is gone, replaced by the understanding that he is trapped in a fortress that has become a target. At 9 o'clock, Lieutenant Furking moves through the bunker complex conducting an ammunition count. The news is bad. They have expended more than half their machine gun ammunition. Mortar rounds are running low. Grenades are being hoarded for close defense. Furking sends runners through the communication trenches to request resupply, but the runners return with news that some trenches are blocked by bombardment, that communication with rear areas is spotty. One runner does not return at all, presumably killed by American fire. Furking makes a command decision. Cease automatic fire, switch to semi-automatic, conserve ammunition. This is the moment when the defense begins to fail. The Americans below notice the slackening of fire. They begin to move more freely. Small groups start advancing up the bluff. The continuous fire that pinned them is becoming sporadic fire that can be avoided. By 10 o'clock, Gockel realizes they are being flanked. Americans have infiltrated the bluffs on both sides of WN62. The strong point is designed to fire forward onto the beach. Its rear defences are minimal, just wire and a few rifle positions. Gockel can hear small arms fire from behind the position, getting closer. The realization is terrifying. They are about to be attacked from the blind side. German doctrine for the situation is clear. If the position is compromised, evacuate to secondary defences. But Furking has not given that order yet. The men continue fighting, firing at the beach, while danger approaches from behind. At 11 o'clock, an American grenade explodes inside the bunker complex, thrown down a ventilation shaft. One German soldier is killed instantly, 2 others wounded. Furking finally gives the order to evacuate. The defenders abandon their positions, taking only personal weapons and moving quickly through a rear communication trench. Some make it to secondary positions half a mile inland. Others are cut down by American fire as they retreat. Gockel runs, not looking back, abandoning the gun he fired all morning, thinking only of survival. Of the 40 men who defended WN62, 21 are captured, 3 are killed during the evacuation, and 16 escape. The position that killed hundreds of Americans has fallen, its guns silenced, its magazine of ammunition abandoned to the enemy. At 2 p.m, Corporal Gockel reaches German lines and reports to the first officer he finds. His report is received with disbelief. The beach is lost? Impossible. The Atlantic Wall was impregnable. But Gockel insists. He saw thousands of Americans, saw them advance despite casualties, saw the strong points fall one by one. The officer, a rear echelon supply captain who has never been in combat, looks at Gockel with something like contempt. You abandoned your position? Gockel, exhausted and traumatized, does not defend himself. He simply nods. The captain orders him to the rear for dereliction of duty. Gockel will spend the rest of the war wondering if he is a coward for retreating or a pragmatist for surviving. He does not yet understand that the entire German defensive system has collapsed, that his retreat was not cowardice but recognition of reality. At 3 p.m, General Crace, commanding the 352nd Division, receives reports from multiple sectors that American forces have penetrated inland. He attempts to organize a counterattack, but discovers that his reserves are scattered, that communication with forward units is nearly impossible, that American artillery is already firing on German assembly areas. The counterattack, when it comes, is too little and too late. Small unit assaults are defeated piecemeal by Americans who are now dug in with artillery support. The moment when a concentrated German response might have succeeded has passed. Crace will be killed by Allied artillery within weeks. His division, battered on June 6th, will be slowly ground down in the hedgerow fighting that follows. At dusk, Heinz Sevelo, who has escaped capture, lies in a ditch a mile from the beach and listens to American vehicles moving inland. He has survived the day, but knows Germany has lost it. He will later write a memoir claiming to have killed hundreds of Americans, a claim that makes him briefly famous and permanently controversial. Whether his numbers are accurate is unknowable. What is certain is that men like Sevelo, skilled and determined defenders, fighting from prepared positions with good weapons, made D-Day far more costly than it needed to be. They could not win. German logistics, German doctrine, German strategic situation, all made defeat inevitable once the Allies landed in strength. But they could kill, and they did, efficiently and terribly, until ammunition ran out and positions were overrun. The view from the bunkers was of overwhelming enemy numbers, of a battle lost despite individual competence, of a wall that proved not to be a wall at all but a line drawn in sand, washed away by the tide of American industrial power. They fought well and lost anyway, which is perhaps the most honest description of the German experience on D-Day. June 8th, 1944, aboard USS Augusta. General Omar Bradley sits at a small desk in his cabin, reviewing after-action reports that are only beginning to arrive from Omaha Beach. The numbers are staggering and horrifying. 2,400 casualties, perhaps more when final counts are completed, 10 times the casualties at Utah Beach, higher than projected for the worst-case scenario. Bradley, who authorized the assault, who accepted the risk, now must understand why the cost was so high. The reports offer fragments of explanation. Bombardment failed, obstacles not cleared, unexpected enemy resistance. But Bradley needs more than fragments. He needs to understand the cascade of failures so that future operations do not repeat them. He begins drafting questions for an investigation that will consume weeks and produce a document of brutal honesty about American military failures. The bombardment failure is the first and perhaps most critical error. The aerial bombardment, 2,876 tons of bombs, fell almost entirely inland, missing the beach defences by 1 to 3 miles. The cause is clear in retrospect. Bombardiers, flying through clouds, delayed their release for fear of hitting landing craft. The delay was humane, but disastrous. If the bombs had fallen on target, if the bunkers had been cratered and the obstacles destroyed, the beach would have been a fundamentally different battlefield. But intent does not change outcome. The beaches were not softened. The defences remained intact, and men died because bombs fell in empty fields rather than on enemy positions. The naval gunfire was more accurate than the aerial bombardment, but still inadequate. 40 minutes of shelling sounds impressive until one calculates the math. 329 ships firing for 40 minutes equals approximately 15,000 shells spread across 4 miles of beach and dozens of hardened targets. This amounts to perhaps 200 shells per strongpoint. Against reinforced concrete 6 to 10 feet thick, 200 shells are insufficient. British beaches received over 2 hours of naval bombardment, allowing multiple passes and adjustment of fire. Omaha received what the tide schedule allowed, not what the target required. Some bunkers were never hit, others absorbed hits that scarred concrete but did not penetrate. The naval officers knew at the time that 40 minutes was marginal. They fired anyway because there was no alternative. The tide would not wait for optimal bombardment duration. The DD tank disaster compounded the bombardment failure. The plan called for 32 swimming tanks to reach the beach before the infantry, providing covering fire against bunkers. Instead, 27 tanks sank in heavy seas, launched too far offshore in conditions that exceeded design limits. The decision to launch at sea rather than carry tanks closer to shore was made by officers who trusted technical specifications over environmental conditions. The tanks were rated for seas up to force 4. The actual seas were force 5 to 6. The margin of error was exceeded, and men drowned inside sinking steel boxes. The 5 tanks that did reach shore were too few to provide meaningful support. The infantry landed naked to enemy fire, without the armoured shield that was supposed to save them. Combat engineers suffered 40% casualties in the first hour, preventing the obstacle clearing that was central to the plan. 16 teams were assigned to blow 16 gaps through beach obstacles. Only 5 gaps were cleared. The engineers were killed by machine gun fire while trying to place demolitions. Others had their explosives detonated prematurely by enemy fire, killing them and nearby infantry. Some teams reached obstacles only to discover their charges were waterlogged. The failure to clear obstacles forced subsequent waves to land in the same congested sectors as the first wave, multiplying casualties. The plan assumed engineers could work under covering fire from tanks and infantry, but the tanks had sunk and the infantry was pinned down. The engineers worked alone and died in large numbers. On June 15th, a board of inquiry examines timing and discovers an uncomfortable truth. If the tide had been 30 minutes different, if H-hour had been delayed or advanced, casualty rates might have been significantly different. A later H-hour would have meant obstacles submerged, but also better light and more time for bombardment. An earlier H-hour would have meant longer crossing of exposed beach. Every element of the invasion was tied to tidal calculations that allowed no flexibility. The chosen time was a compromise between competing demands, and compromises by definition are optimal for nothing. The board cannot conclude that different timing would have prevented the bloodbath, only that timing was one of many factors where marginal changes might have compounded to significant effect. The intelligence failure regarding the 352nd Division is examined with particular intensity. Analysts knew the division existed, they knew it was in Normandy. The failure was one of precision, not knowing it had moved forward into coastal positions. In the fog of war, this seems like a minor error. On the beach, it meant facing combat veterans instead of garrison troops, facing competent defence instead of reluctant resistance. The board's conclusion is damning but vague. Intelligence was excellent in detail and inadequate in timeliness. The Germans moved quickly and quietly in early June. American reconnaissance did not detect the movement until too late. How to prevent such failures in future is unclear. Intelligence is inherently uncertain. The board recommends more frequent reconnaissance and faster dissemination of updates, but cannot promise these would have caught the 352nd's redeployment. A comparison with Utah Beach provides painful contrast. Utah had 325 casualties on D-Day. Omaha had 2,400. The difference cannot be attributed to courage or competence of troops. The same caliber of soldiers assaulted both beaches. The difference is in execution and fortune. Utah's bombardment was more effective because visibility was better. Utah's DD tanks reached shore because they were launched closer in. Utah's defences were thinner because the German 709th Division defending there was weaker and had fewer natural strongpoints. Utah also benefited from landing in the wrong place due to current arriving at a less defended sector by accident. Omaha had no such luck. Everything that could go wrong at Omaha went wrong. Everything that could go right at Utah went right. The comparison suggests that amphibious assault against defended beaches involves an enormous component of chance that planning cannot eliminate. Senior commanders faced questions about whether the assault should have been aborted once it became clear that bombardment had failed. From ships offshore, officers could see that German fire was heavier than expected, that casualties were mounting, that the first waves were pinned down. Bradley considered diverting follow-on waves to other beaches. He decided against it because abandoning Omaha meant abandoning the dead and wounded, meant creating a gap between Utah and British sectors, meant admitting defeat. The decision to continue was strategically sound but tactically brutal. Every wave after the first landed into known heavy casualties. The men were sent in with full knowledge that many would die. The commanders who made these decisions will defend them as necessary. The soldiers who survived will question whether their friends died needlessly after the operation had clearly gone wrong. The after-action report, completed in July, is a document of institutional self-criticism rare in military history. It catalogues failures without euphemism. Bombardment failed, intelligence was inadequate, timing was poor, equipment failed, casualties were excessive. But it also notes success. Soldiers adapted, junior leaders showed initiative, naval gunfire eventually suppressed defences, the beach was taken. The report's conclusion is complex. The plan was flawed, execution was worse, but success was achieved because American soldiers refused to quit. This is not a ringing endorsement of planning or leadership. It is an acknowledgement that battles are won by individuals, that institutions fail more often than they succeed, that war is chaos and victory goes not to the best plan but to the side that endures chaos longest. The lessons of Omaha will be applied in future operations. Longer bombardments, closer tank launches, better engineer support. But the fundamental lesson cannot be systematized. That men will cross killing grounds if they believe the mission is necessary. That courage compensates for planning failures. That some victories are achieved despite strategy rather than because of it. Omaha Beach succeeded because men like Harold Baumgarten and Ray Nance did not have the option to fail. They were sent to die, and they survived instead. And in their survival, they redeemed the failures of their commanders. June 7th, 1944, dawn. Navy beachmasters wade into the surf at Omaha Beach, whistles around their necks, determined to bring order from yesterday's chaos. These are lieutenants and chief petty officers whose job is traffic control, directing landing craft to appropriate sectors, ensuring boats do not cluster in congested areas, maintaining the flow of men and material from ship to shore. Yesterday they were helpless, watching craft land wherever currents carried them, watching plans dissolve in confusion. Today is different. The beach is secured, the defences are silent. Now logistics can function. The beachmasters establish control points, mark lanes with buoys, assign sectors to different types of craft. LSTs are directed to specific beaches where their bow ramps can lower onto sand. LCTs carrying vehicles are sent to areas where exits are open. LCIs with infantry are routed to sectors where troops can wade ashore safely. The beach, a graveyard yesterday, becomes an organised port today. By June 8th, the first LSTs, landing ship tanks, beach at high tide on Omaha. These vessels are 328 feet long, capable of carrying tanks, trucks, and supplies directly onto shore. Their bow doors open, ramps lower, and vehicles drive off onto French sand. This is the moment the invasion transitions from assault to sustainment. The LSTs carry not just combat vehicles, but fuel trucks, ammunition carriers, engineering equipment, medical supplies. They disgorge their cargo in minutes, retract, and return to England for more. The efficiency is staggering. A single LST can deliver 500 tons of supplies. Dozens of LSTs are shuttling across the channel continuously. By June 10th, over 100,000 tons of supplies have been landed at Omaha, enough to sustain an army. Engineers work with extraordinary speed to create infrastructure that does not exist. On June 7th, the 5 exits that were cleared during battle are inadequate for the volume of traffic. Engineers bulldoze 8 additional routes up the bluff, cutting roads through terrain the Germans considered impassable. They blast rock, fill craters, bridge ditches, grade slopes. By June 10th, 13 exits are operational, handling continuous streams of vehicles. The roads are crude, dirt tracks without surfacing, but they are functional. Trucks and jeeps and tanks climb from beach to interior in convoys that stretch for miles. The transformation is visible from aerial photographs. The beach that was a battlefield is now a highway, a supply line, an artery pumping resources into the invasion. The Mulberry Artificial Harbour, a British engineering marvel, begins construction on June 7th. This is a prefabricated port consisting of concrete caissons that will be towed across the channel and sunk to create breakwaters. The Mulberry at Omaha is designated Mulberry A. It will take 10 days to complete and will allow ships to unload at piers rather than beaching. The construction is a race against time. Weather forecasts suggest a storm is approaching. The engineers work 24 hours a day, positioning caissons, anchoring pontoon bridges, establishing piers. By June 18th, Mulberry A is partially complete and handling cargo. Then, on June 19th, the storm strikes. Force 7 winds tear apart the harbour, breaking caissons, sinking pontoons, destroying piers. The Mulberry is devastated, never to be fully rebuilt. But by then it has served its purpose, handling critical supplies during the vulnerable period when the beachhead was establishing itself. Casualty evacuation is conducted with efficiency that saves thousands of lives. Wounded men on the beach are triaged and loaded onto returning landing craft. The craft transport them to hospital ships anchored offshore. The hospital ships provide surgical care, stabilise patients, then transport them to England. By June 18th, 13,000 wounded have been evacuated through this system. The rapidity of evacuation means men receive definitive surgical care within hours of being wounded, dramatically improving survival rates. Medical officers note that the evacuation system, tested in previous campaigns, has been perfected. The difference between death and survival is often measured in hours. The system provides those hours. Supply dumps appear on the beaches like mushrooms after rain. Ammunition is stacked in piles protected by sandbags. Fuel is stored in thousands of 5-gallon jerry cans. Rations are palletized and marked by unit. Medical supplies, engineering equipment, replacement weapons, all are organized into dumps that resemble small cities. Quartermaster units operate around the clock, receiving supplies from ships, sorting them, loading them onto trucks for delivery inland. The scale is staggering. On June 12th alone, over 10,000 tons of supplies are landed at Omaha. This is the logistical equivalent of supplying a city of 100,000 people. And it happens day after day, continuously, without pause. German attempts to disrupt the buildup are feeble and ineffective. Sporadic artillery fire lands on the beaches, killing a few men, destroying some supplies. But there is no sustained bombardment, no air attacks, no determined effort to interdict the supply line. The Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, is conspicuously absent. Allied fighters patrol the skies continuously, but they find no targets. German air power has been destroyed in the months before D-Day, attrited by fighter sweeps and bomber escorts. On June 6th and 7th, the Luftwaffe manages only a handful of sorties over Normandy. By June 8th, they attempt none. The Allies own the sky, and with air superiority comes the ability to operate logistically without interference. By June 12th, 326,000 men have landed at Omaha Beach. This is the population of a major city, delivered across 4 miles of beach in 6 days. They have brought with them 54,000 vehicles and 104,000 tons of supplies. The numbers are almost incomprehensible. To visualize, 54,000 vehicles parked bumper to bumper would stretch for 200 miles. 104,000 tons of supplies would fill 1,400 rail cars. This is not warfare as conducted in previous centuries. This is industrial warfare, where success is determined not by tactics or courage, but by the ability to deliver overwhelming material to the battlefield. The Germans cannot match this. They lack the shipping, the air power, the industrial base, the organizational skill. They can fight brilliantly at the tactical level and still lose because they cannot compete logistically. Field hospitals are established just inland from the beach, treating both American and German wounded. Tented surgical units perform operations while artillery rumbles in the distance. German prisoners, wounded and unwounded, are processed through camps near the beach. They are searched, registered, given food and water, then loaded onto ships for transport to England. The prisoners look at the scale of American supplies with something like despair. They have been told Germany is winning, that American industry is weak, that the invasion would be defeated. Instead, they see endless convoys, mountains of supplies, organization that functions despite chaos. They understand, perhaps before their commanders do, that Germany has lost. The logistics miracle of Omaha Beach is not a miracle at all, but the result of meticulous planning and enormous resources. The American military has spent 3 years preparing for this operation, building landing craft, training specialists, stockpiling supplies. The Allies have complete control of the sea and air, allowing them to operate without significant interference. They have the industrial capacity to produce material faster than it can be consumed. None of this is accidental or magical. It is the culmination of effort by millions of workers in factories, shipyards, training camps across America, and Britain. But to the soldiers on the beach, watching supplies appear in inexhaustible quantities, it does seem miraculous. They landed on a beach that tried to kill them, fought through German defences, and now, days later, are being supported by a logistical system that delivers ice cream and fresh uniforms along with ammunition and fuel. The contrast between the brutality of combat and the abundance of supply is jarring. It is also quintessentially American, the ability to deliver both violence and comfort, to kill efficiently and supply generously, to wage war as an industrial process where human suffering is mitigated by material abundance. Omaha Beach becomes not just a battlefield but a demonstration of American power, a statement that this invasion cannot be stopped because the resources behind it are infinite. The logistics miracle is the real victory, more significant than any tactical success, because it proves that the Allies can sustain operations indefinitely, that the beachhead will not wither but grow, that from this tiny lodgement will come the liberation of a continent. Lieutenant John Spaulding never sought recognition for his actions on D-Day. He was 26 years old, a platoon leader in E Company, 16th Infantry Regiment, a schoolteacher from Kentucky who joined the army because he believed in the cause. On June 6th, he led his platoon through a minefield, breached German defences, infiltrated behind enemy lines, and captured a strongpoint. His actions opened a gap in German defences that allowed hundreds of men to advance. For this, he received a Silver Star, awarded months after the battle, a decoration he accepted quietly and never spoke of publicly. After the war, he returned to teaching. He died in 1999, aged 81, largely unknown outside his family and unit. There was no national funeral, no presidential eulogy, no documentary about his life, yet his actions on a single morning were more consequential to the success of D-Day than the decisions of generals. He represents the paradox of military heroism. The men who most deserve recognition often seek it least. Colonel George Taylor's command on Omaha Beach was characterized by physical courage and verbal inspiration. Taylor, commanding the 16th Infantry, was 52 years old on D-Day. Old by infantry standards but vigorous. He landed at 7:30 a.m., saw men pinned at the seawall, and recognized immediately that the attack was stalling. His response was to stand, exposed to fire, and shame men into movement. Two kinds of people are staying on this beach: those who are dead and those who are going to die. Now, let's get the hell out of here. The quote has been repeated so often it risks becoming cliché, but soldiers who were there remember the moment with crystalline clarity. Taylor's willingness to expose himself, his obvious lack of fear, his expectation of movement, all combined to break the paralysis. Men stood because their commander stood. They advanced because he demanded it. Leadership reduced to its essence: presence, courage, and authority. Taylor survived D-Day, fought through Normandy, and retired as a Major General. His legacy is not grand strategy, but a single sentence that changed a battle. Captain Lawrence Medill commanded USS Carmick, a destroyer, on D-Day. His orders were to provide fire support from a distance safe from German shore batteries, approximately 2 miles offshore. At 8 a.m., Medill observed through binoculars that American infantry was being slaughtered. He made a decision that violated his orders and risked his ship. He closed to 800 yards from shore, near enough to risk grounding, within range of German anti-tank guns. From this position, Carmick could fire directly at bunker embrasures with devastating effect. Medill's 5-inch guns destroyed at least 3 bunkers, suppressed others, and drew German fire away from infantry. Other destroyer captains made similar decisions. USS McCook, USS Doyle, USS Frankfurt, USS Harding, all moved dangerously close to shore and engaged German positions at point-blank range. Several were hit but continued firing. The destroyer captains received commendations, but their true reward was watching soldiers advance because German fire had slackened. They violated orders to save lives. They risked their ships and crews to support infantry they would never meet. This is leadership at its purest, sacrificing regulations to achieve mission. Sergeant Philip Stretchick was a squad leader in G Company, 16th Infantry. He was 31 years old, a factory worker from Pennsylvania, a man who joined the National Guard during the Depression for the steady pay. On D-Day, he found himself leaderless when his lieutenant was killed and his platoon sergeant was wounded. Rather than wait for orders, Stretchik organized an assault on a German bunker that was killing Americans in great numbers. He led 12 men in a flanking attack, using grenades and rifle fire to suppress the bunker, then crawled close enough to throw a grenade through the firing slit. The bunker fell silent. Stretchik repeated this tactic on 2 more bunkers that morning. He received a Silver Star. 2 weeks later, he was killed in hedgerow fighting, shot by a sniper while leading another assault. His name appears on the Normandy Memorial, but is known to almost no one outside his family. He represents the thousands of NCOs who led when officers fell, who made tactical decisions without training or authority, who did what needed doing because there was no one else to do it. The failure of senior leadership on D-Day is conspicuous when contrasted with junior success. General Bradley remained aboard USS Augusta until afternoon, out of communication with the beach, unable to influence events. General Leonard Gero, commanding 5th Corps, was similarly offshore and ineffective. The plan had assumed these commanders would direct the battle from ships using radio communications, but radios failed, landing craft carried inadequate communication equipment, and the chaos on the beach made coordination impossible. Senior commanders were blind, receiving fragmentary reports hours after events occurred. They could not help because they could not see. The invasion succeeded without them, proof that battles are won or lost at the tactical level, regardless of strategic brilliance. Of the 16 company commanders who landed in the first wave at Omaha, 14 were killed or wounded in the first hour. Company-level leadership collapsed instantly. The invasion should have stalled when captains fell, but it did not because lieutenants took command, and when lieutenants fell, sergeants took command, and when sergeants fell, privates kept fighting. The American military's investment in training individual soldiers to think and act independently paid dividends at Omaha. German soldiers were often better at following orders, but American soldiers were better at improvising when orders made no sense, or when there were no orders at all. This cultural difference, the American emphasis on individual initiative, was decisive. Military decorations awarded for D-Day reveal an interesting pattern. 3 Medals of Honor were awarded for actions at Omaha Beach, all posthumously. No living officer above the rank of captain received the Medal of Honor for Omaha. The highest decorations went to junior enlisted men and NCOs who led assaults on bunkers, who carried wounded under fire, who sacrificed themselves for others. Senior officers received Distinguished Service Medals and Legion of Merit decorations, awards for planning and coordination, not combat leadership. The decoration pattern accurately reflects who won the battle, privates and sergeants, not colonels and generals. Bradley himself, in his memoirs, written decades later, acknowledged the disconnect between planning and execution. "We had the wrong plan," he wrote. Or rather, we had a plan that assumed bombardment would work, and when it didn't, we had no fallback. The men on the beach saved us, not the generals. This is rare honesty from a senior commander, an admission that institutional plans failed and individual courage compensated. Military institutions resist this conclusion because it suggests that planning is less important than assumed, that armies succeed despite headquarters as much as because of them. But the evidence from Omaha is clear. When the plan collapsed in the first minutes, when bombardment failed and tanks sank and engineers died, victory came from soldiers who had never seen the plan and would not have followed it if they had. Leadership on D-Day was not about grand strategy or operational art. It was about presence at the moment of crisis, about standing when others cowered, about moving when others froze. John Spaulding led through competence and navigation. George Taylor led through courage and command, presence. Lawrence Medill led through initiative and violation of orders. Philip Stretchik led through example and sacrifice. None of them were geniuses. None of them had access to information or resources that others lacked. They simply acted when action was required, made decisions when decisions were necessary, and accepted responsibility when responsibility was thrust upon them. This is the essence of combat leadership. Not intelligence or planning, but willingness to act in the face of uncertainty, to accept consequences, to lead by example. The military promotes officers based on education and staff experience, values that serve well in peacetime. But war reveals a different kind of leader, the kind who is forged in crisis rather than trained in schools. Omaha Beach produced its share of these leaders. Most are forgotten now, names in dusty unit histories, faces in fading photographs. But they won the battle that the generals nearly lost. And in winning, they demonstrated that armies are only as good as their junior leaders, that institutions serve primarily to deliver those leaders to the battlefield, and that once battle is joined, individual character matters more than rank or position. This is not a lesson that institutions easily accept, but it is a lesson that every battle teaches to those willing to learn. 1944 through 45. Private Harold Baumgarten survives D-Day, but barely. The bullet that tore through his face, destroyed his left cheek, shattered teeth, and exited through his jaw. He is evacuated to England, where surgeons perform the first of 15 reconstructive operations. Each surgery rebuilds a little more of his face, grafting skin, wiring jawbones, creating something that resembles what he looked like before June 6th. The physical healing takes years. The psychological wounds never heal. Baumgarten suffers nightmares throughout his life, dreams where he is back in the water, watching men drown, feeling the impact of the bullet. But he is also determined. He returns to America, attends college on the GI Bill, and becomes a doctor. He chooses medicine because he wants to heal, wants to save lives, to balance the lives taken on the beach. He works as a physician for 40 years, treating thousands of patients, never mentioning his war service unless asked. When he finally retires, he begins speaking about D-Day, giving interviews, writing memoirs. The memories that he suppressed for decades emerge in a flood of words. He dies in 2016, aged 90, one of the last living survivors of the first wave at Omaha Beach. Sergeant Ray Nance returns to Virginia in 1945 and tries to resume his life as a tobacco farmer. He does not speak about the war, not to his wife, not to his children, not to anyone. He files the experience away in some locked compartment of his mind and refuses to open it. His family learns about his service by accident in the 1960s when a newspaper publishes an article about D-Day veterans living in the area. His wife reads that her husband landed in the first wave at Omaha Beach, that he received a Bronze Star, that 8 of his 12-man squad died. She confronts him. "Why didn't you tell me?" Nance shrugs. What was there to tell? This is typical of his generation. Men who experienced horror and considered it private, who believed that speaking about trauma was weakness, who carried their memories in silence for decades. Nance dies in 1993. At his funeral, his son delivers a eulogy that mentions the war for the first time publicly. Even then, the family knows almost nothing about what their father experienced. 1984, the 40th anniversary of D-Day. Hundreds of veterans return to Normandy for commemoration ceremonies. Many are making their first return since the war. They gather on the beaches where they fought. Old men now, some in wheelchairs, some using canes. The French government organises events, speeches, wreath layings. President Reagan gives an address at Pointe du Hoc, speaking of the boys of Pointe du Hoc with reverence. But for the veterans themselves, the ceremonies are secondary. What matters is being there, seeing the beaches again, confronting memories they have carried for 40 years. Some weep openly. Others stand silently, staring at the water. A few walk into the surf, touching the water as if to prove to themselves that they survived, that they are here, that the ghosts are only memories. Veteran Charles Neighbour later describes the return. "I thought going back would bring closure. Instead, it brought it all back. I could see the bodies in the water, hear the machine guns. It was like I never left." 2004, the 60th anniversary. The veteran population has diminished dramatically. Most men who were 20 in 1944 are now 80. Many are too frail to travel. Harold Baumgarten, age 79, returns to Omaha Beach and gives an interview to a documentary crew. His testimony is raw and unfiltered. "I can still see the faces of the men who drowned," he says, tears running down his scarred cheek. "I remember their names. I see them every night when I close my eyes." 60 years, and I still see them. The documentary makers are struck by the intensity of his emotion, the immediacy of his memory. For Baumgarten, D-Day is not history. It is a present tense experience that he relives constantly. Other veterans describe similar experiences: nightmares that never stopped, sudden tears triggered by sounds or smells, the inability to watch war movies or fireworks displays. Post-traumatic stress disorder is not widely recognised until the Vietnam War, but it is clear in retrospect that many D-Day veterans suffered from it. In the 1940s and 50s, it was called combat fatigue or shell shock. conditions that were stigmatized and rarely treated. Veterans were expected to get over it, to resume normal lives without complaint. Most tried. They married, had children, worked jobs, and buried their trauma beneath layers of normalcy. But the trauma leaked out in private moments. Sudden rages, night terrors, emotional numbness, hypervigilance. Families coped without understanding. Wives attributed their husbands' behaviors to personality rather than trauma. Children grew up with fathers who were physically present but emotionally distant, men who would not or could not speak about their experiences. Congressional Medals of Honor awarded for D-Day reveal the cost of heroism. Only 3 were awarded for Omaha Beach, all posthumously. First Lieutenant Jimmy Monteith led attacks on German positions, exposing himself repeatedly to enemy fire until he was killed by a sniper. Staff Sergeant Walter Ehlers fought through German defences despite being wounded, rescued a wounded comrade, then continued fighting until the objective was secured. Technician 5th Grade John Pinder made 3 trips across the beach to recover communications equipment, wounded twice, continuing until he was killed on his 3rd trip. These men died performing actions that had to be performed, sacrificing themselves because the mission required it. They are heroes by any definition. But the survivors carry a different burden, not the glory of sacrifice, but the guilt of survival. Why did I live when they died? This question haunts many veterans, a form of survivor guilt that persists for decades. Bedford, Virginia, becomes a town of mourning after D-Day. Company A, 116th Regiment, drew heavily from Bedford. Of the 96 men in the company, 19 were from Bedford. All 19 were casualties on June 6th, most killed. The town lost 19 men from a population of 3,000, proportionally one of the highest losses of any American community. The D-Day National Memorial is eventually built in Bedford, recognizing this sacrifice. But memorials are cold comfort for mothers who lost sons, for widows who raised children alone, for siblings who grew up without brothers. The town's collective grief is profound and lasting. Even today, 80 years later, families remember the loss, pass down the stories, maintain the memory of men who died on a beach in France. 2024. Fewer than 100 survivors of the Omaha Beach first wave remain alive. They are in their late 90s or centenarians. Most are too frail to travel to commemorations. They live quietly, often in care facilities, the last witnesses to an event that defined the 20th century. Historians race to record their testimonies before the living memory disappears entirely. Over 2,000 oral histories have been collected, archived, preserved for future generations. The survivors speak with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Pride that they served, that they contributed to victory, that they survived. Sorrow for the friends lost, for the innocents destroyed, for the cost of the war. When asked if it was worth it, most say yes, but the affirmation is complicated, haunted by memories of friends who never came home, by the knowledge that victory was purchased with lives. The men who came home from Omaha Beach are not a monolithic group. Some thrived, built successful lives, integrated their war experience into larger narratives of service and sacrifice. Others struggled, battled addiction and depression, never fully recovered from the trauma. Most fell somewhere between living ordinary lives marked by extraordinary memories. What unites them is the burden of having experienced something that cannot be explained to those who were not there, of carrying knowledge that is incommunicable. They were 19 and 20 years old when they waded into the water at Omaha Beach. They are old men now, the last survivors of a generation that saved the world. When they die, something irreplaceable dies with them, the direct human connection to an event that shaped history. Soon there will be no living witnesses, only documents and photographs and second-hand accounts. The memories will persist, but the men who carried them will be gone, leaving behind only the question that survivors always ask and can never answer. Why did I survive when so many others did not? 2024. A family from Ohio walks along Omaha Beach on a summer morning. Children play at the water's edge, building sandcastles, chasing waves. Parents spread a blanket on the sand and unpack a picnic lunch. Tourists photograph the seascape, the cliffs, the memorials. It is peaceful, almost idyllic, impossible to reconcile with the events of 80 years ago. The beach shows no scars of battle. The bunkers remain, but are weathered, half-buried, tourist attractions rather than instruments of death. A grandfather, perhaps aware of the history, points toward the bluff and tries to explain to his grandson what happened here. The boy listens politely but cannot grasp it. Death and violence on this scale are abstractions to him, historical facts without emotional resonance. The grandfather understands this and does not press. Some things cannot be taught, only experienced, and he is grateful his grandson will never experience what the men of June 6th experienced. The American cemetery above Omaha Beach contains 9,387 graves, white crosses and stars of David arranged in perfect rows overlooking the sea. Each marker represents a choice between death and victory, a life traded for the liberation of Europe. The cemetery is maintained with military precision, grass mowed, stones cleaned, flowers placed. It is beautiful and terrible, a place of mourning and memory. Visitors walk among the graves, reading names and ages, noting how many were 19 or 20 years old. The mathematics of sacrifice become personal here. 9,387 men, each with families, futures, dreams, all ended on or near this beach. The cemetery is not the largest from World War II, but it is perhaps the most visited. A pilgrimage site where people come to pay respects to men they never knew who died for causes they inherit but did not choose. The causal chain from Omaha Beach to the end of the war is direct and undeniable. The success of D-Day allowed the Allies to establish a major front in Western Europe, forcing Germany to fight a two-front war against the Soviets in the east and the Western Allies in the west. Within 3 months of D-Day, 2 million Allied troops were in France. By September, Paris was liberated. By December, Allied forces reached the German border. Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, 11 months after D-Day. The war in Europe could have been won without D-Day, but it would have taken longer, cost more lives, possibly ended with Soviet forces occupying all of Germany rather than just the eastern half. D-Day shortened the war and shaped the post-war political map of Europe. In this sense, Omaha Beach was not just a battle but a hinge point in history, a moment when the outcome of the largest war in human history turned decisively toward Allied victory. Counterfactual history is speculative but illuminating. What if Omaha Beach had failed? What if German defenders had driven the Americans back into the sea? The invasion would not have ended. The Allies had overwhelming resources and would have attempted again, but failure would have delayed victory by 6 months to a year. German scientists were working on jet aircraft, ballistic missiles, potentially nuclear weapons. A longer war might have allowed Germany to deploy these technologies at scale. A longer war would have meant hundreds of thousands more casualties, more cities destroyed, more civilians killed. The cost of failure at Omaha would have been measured not in thousands but in hundreds of thousands of lives. The beach was held by a narrow margin. If a few more officers had fallen, if a few more bunkers had remained operational, if German reserves had counterattacked more quickly, the outcome might have been different. D-Day succeeded not because success was inevitable, but because individual soldiers made it succeed despite enormous obstacles. From the German perspective, D-Day was the beginning of the end. The Atlantic Wall failed. The reserves were delayed. The counterattack never materialized. German forces in Normandy fought skillfully and bravely, but were ground down by Allied material superiority. Within weeks, the German 7th Army was destroyed, surrounded at Falaise, annihilated by artillery and air power. The survivors retreated toward Germany, fighting, delaying actions, but never regaining the initiative. German commanders knew after D-Day that the war was lost. They fought on out of duty, out of fear of Hitler, out of hope that some miracle might save Germany. But the miracle never came. The industrial might of America and the manpower of the Soviet Union were too great. Germany was crushed between two anvils, its cities reduced to rubble, its military defeated, its ideology discredited. D-Day was not the sole cause of German defeat, but it was the moment when defeat became certain and imminent. Casualty figures provide context for the cost of Omaha Beach. American casualties at Omaha on D-Day totaled approximately 2,400, 42% of total American D-Day casualties across all beaches. The number is staggering but must be compared to other battles. The Battle of the Bulge cost 19,000 American dead. The Battle of Okinawa cost 12,000 dead. Omaha Beach was deadly but not uniquely so. What makes Omaha significant is not the casualty count, but the concentration of casualties in space and time. 2,400 men killed or wounded in a few hours, across 4 miles of beach. The density of suffering at Omaha was extreme, creating an experience of combat that traumatized survivors and shaped historical memory. Omaha is remembered as D-Day's bloodiest beach, not because it was bloodier than other battles, but because the violence was compressed into such a small area and brief time. The question of whether success was inevitable or contingent haunts historical analysis. Some argue that American material superiority made victory inevitable, that Germany could not have held the beach even if the defences had been stronger or the bombardment less effective. This view holds that the outcome was determined by industrial capacity and that individual courage, while admirable, was not decisive. Others argue that Omaha nearly failed, that German defences came close to achieving their objective of destroying the landing force, that success depended on specific actions by specific individuals at critical moments. This view holds that history is contingent, that small events cascade into large consequences, that nothing was inevitable. The truth is likely somewhere between. Victory was probable but not certain. The Allies had enormous advantages but also made significant errors. The battle could have gone differently if any of several factors had varied. Weather, timing, German troop dispositions, effectiveness of bombardment. History is not destiny. Omaha Beach succeeded because men made it succeed, and they nearly failed in the attempt. What made the difference at Omaha Beach was not technology, not planning, not even courage in the abstract. What made the difference was the refusal of individual soldiers to accept defeat. Men like John Spaulding, who led through minefields. Men like George Taylor, who stood when others cowered. Men like Lawrence Medill, who violated orders to save lives. Men like Philip Stretchek, who attacked bunkers without orders or support. These were not superhuman figures. They were ordinary men who did extraordinary things, because the alternative was unthinkable. The American military system deserves credit for training soldiers to think independently, to adapt to chaos, to function without orders or leadership. But the system could only create potential. The soldiers had to actualize it. They had to choose to advance when staying put was safer, to fight when surrender was possible, to lead when following was easier. That choice, made by hundreds of men in hundreds of moments, was the margin of victory. The debt owed by the present to the past is incalculable. The men who died at Omaha Beach did not die for abstract principles. They died because they were ordered to cross a beach and they obeyed. Whether they understood the strategic significance of their actions is doubtful. Most were thinking about survival, about reaching cover, about helping the soldier next to them. They were not fighting for democracy or freedom in any philosophical sense. They were fighting because that was their job, and because retreating was not an option. Yet their actions secured a future that they did not live to see: a Europe free from Nazi tyranny, a world order based on democratic principles, a peace that has endured for 80 years. The living inherit that peace and rarely think about the men who purchased it with their lives. Omaha Beach is where the future was bought at the price of the present, where 19-year-olds died so that children not yet born could live in freedom. The ultimate meaning of Omaha Beach is not found in casualty statistics or strategic analysis, but in the human capacity for endurance. War is chaos. Plans fail. Technology fails. Institutions fail. What remains is individual human beings, terrified and confused, making choices under impossible conditions. At Omaha Beach, enough men chose to advance rather than retreat, to fight rather than surrender, to endure rather than quit. Their choice was not rational in any calculating sense. The odds of survival seemed low. The mission seemed impossible. But they advanced anyway, not from courage alone, but from something deeper: the refusal to let down the men beside them, the inability to live with themselves if they quit, the stubborn human determination to survive by moving forward. This is what makes Omaha Beach memorable, not as a tactical problem, but as a human drama. It is a story of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances and somehow prevailing, not through superiority or brilliance, but through sheer bloody-minded persistence. The beach that nearly became a graveyard for American ambitions became instead the gateway to European liberation. And that transformation occurred not because it was planned or inevitable, but because thousands of individual soldiers refused to accept defeat. One step at a time, one bunker at a time, 1 minute at a time, until the impossible became merely difficult and the difficult became achieved. That is the legacy of Omaha Beach. Not that victory is inevitable, but that it is possible if enough people refuse to quit, if enough individuals choose courage over comfort, if enough soldiers take one more step when every instinct screams to stop. The beach awaits still, peaceful and beautiful, its ghosts faded into memory. But the lesson remains written in blood and sand, that free people defending a just cause can overcome any obstacle if they refuse to surrender. That was true on June 6, 1944. It remains true today.